Good afternoon. It's now 1 o'clock. Hello. Could we please stop talking? Bill, it's now 1 o'clock. First, I wish to announce that Councillor Filmer has regrettably had to stand down with immediate effect as chair of this committee. Replacement is currently being sought. Councillor Filmer will remain as a member of the committee. I think this is a very big loss for this committee. He's an extremely good chairman, and I hope that we can proceed in the way we have before under the new chair. Before proceeding, can everybody hear me online?
Yep, I can hear you fine, thanks.
You, everybody else hear me? Thank you. Welcome to all of you to the Scrutiny Committee Corporate and Resources meeting and officers to the JMR Dean House, Taunton for this month's meeting. The agenda pack with papers is available via ModGov or directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to members. Note that the full agenda and all the reports are in the updated agenda reports pack due to a number of unavoidable late reports. Minutes of the previous meeting are in supplement 1, and there are some changes that Scott will be talking about when we get to it in the agenda. And the forward plan is in supplement 2. Note that the report at agenda item 6 has been merged into agenda item 5, so there is no separate report for agenda item 6. When inviting somebody to speak, could you clearly state who you are for the benefit of anybody who is listening to the meeting online, so they can identify who is speaking and ensure that you use the microphones if you are in the room. Advice that the meeting is I'm advising you that the meeting is audio recorded by the council. As agendas are now viewed electronically, request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist everyone present in finding the appropriate information. In respect of housekeeping, I advise you there are no fire alarms expected. If the fire alarm goes off, please follow the Democratic Services officers as they will lead out. The toilets are just outside that you know about. Scott, apologies for absence, please.
Just to advise in terms of apologies, we are expecting Councillor Osborne in place of Councillor Filmer. I know that Councillor Cottle has submitted his apologies and his substitute is Councillor Coles today. I can see that Councillor Collins is joining online. I know that Councillor Trimnell has also submitted apologies and her substitute is Councillor Clark, who's here today. Other than that, Chair, I don't believe I've heard anything yet from Councillor Lovell, so he may well arrive. Sue Osborne has given her apologies and won't be subbing for Bob Filmer. Right, do any members of the committee have any declarations of interest, noting that existence of existing declarations, including membership of other councils and LGPS, local government pension scheme, have already been recorded? None to record. Minutes from the previous meeting, I'm going to let Scott go through these because there are some changes to the published paper. Thank you, Chair. And again, just for everyone's attention, firstly, apologies in terms of the late issue and publication of the minutes from the last meeting. But if I could draw your attention to page 6, where I am proposing some corrections in terms of accuracy. The middle part of that page starts in terms of the committee was taken through the report and appendix with the interim section 151 officer highlighting. The first bullet point, I'm proposing a correction there, which is that the revised budget cap for 2025-26 is now 88.796 million in the central scenario. And then further down, the
bullet point which follows, in the discussion which followed, members made a number of comments which were responded to as follows, and the correction here should read, although the reduction in contract inflation assumptions may seem quite ambitious, there is confidence that this can be achieved and will be carefully tracked.
Apart from that, do we have any alterations from members of the committee? No. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Thank you. Mike and Simon. All vote, please, if you're happy. Are you voting? Thank you. That's unanimous. Can you record that Martin just joined us? Lovely. Right, for the first time and the last time in this meeting, I'm ahead of time. That will cease, I think, on the next agenda item. Moving on to 5 and 6. Liz, if you'd like to open it, and Nicola, take it on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I take your points about timekeeping, although I have noticed that there is another meeting in this room at 6 o'clock this evening, so there will be a curfew at some point. I just wanted to introduce this paper very briefly by asking member colleagues right across the council, as well as this committee, to understand that although I am very pleased to see a forecast underspend, as long as we are using earmarked reserves in the budget for this year, as well as capitalisation directive, that is not truly an underspend. It is simply a lesser draw on the earmarked reserves. So with that understanding, Chair, if I may, I'd like to hand over to Nicola Hicks for more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. Thank you, Chair. So this is the first report that the committee will have seen where we've actually amalgamated the general fund revenue and capital position together into one report. The report is structured in a way where we talk about the revenue first, and then we go on to the capital section. So I'll just go through the report and pick out the key points and areas of focus for the committee. If I refer to page numbers, I am looking at the updated agenda pack. So just that that's the numbers that I will be picking out. So just in terms of, we're starting on page 11, which is the first page of the report. And as Councillor Lation said, as in point 3, we are looking at a balanced revenue position on budget. So we're not reporting it as an underspend or an overspend. We're reporting it as a balanced position. And this is because the services are forecasting, and this is very much a forecast because it needs to come to fruition at the end of the financial year, but they are forecasting an underspend on services of 2.419 million. And if we take into the fact that we haven't used the corporate contingency, if we add the two together, that's a forecast underspend in total of 8.479. But when we use the word underspend, that means in terms of the amount that we are taking from the reserve to balance the budget is reduced. So members will recall that when we set our budget for 2024-25, we used a certain amount of capitalisation directive and a certain amount from our earmarked reserves in order to balance that budget. So the authority is working considerably hard to try and reduce that draw on reserves, and that's where we talk about presenting it as on budget in terms of our position, but what we are doing is reducing that draw on reserves. And we've been able to do that. If you go through the report into section 4, you'll see there's some positive movements in forecast outturn that the services are predicting to happen, as well as if you go down towards the bottom of that section, there are also some negative movements where we're getting the services to truly forecast where they think their year-end position will be, and you can see there that there has been a further increase in the overspend in relation to children and families, which is again, as the committee has heard, is to do with external placements. If we just move down through to the report, section 8 there, because it's a summary of the report, section 8 does talk about capital there, but just talks about the forecast outturn of 114 million, 114.166 million against the we've profiled budget of 119. 0.319 million, but I'll talk about that as we go through the report. Just if we do revenue first, and then I'll come back to capital. So just if you'll see from the report, section 9, which talks about the recommendations, I'm not sure you've seen a budget report before with such a variety and large number of recommendations there. There's quite a lot of things we'll be asking the committee to note, but there was also there some things to approve, especially there where you can see around recommendation N there, the capital slippage of 75 million there. So you'll recall, and when we talk about capital, I'll talk about the fact that we had slippage in capital last year, and therefore the effect that has on revenue. So if we just keep going now into the main body of the report, table 1 on the top of page 16, you'll be familiar with this table in terms of each service then showing its under or overspend. At the bottom of the table, you can see that we've tried to pull some lines into there so that it actually shows that corporate contingency towards the bottom, how we fund the budget, and towards the bottom, the reserves and the capitalisation directive. So when I spoke earlier about the draw on reserves being reduced, you'll see that in the table towards the bottom where you can see we actually forecast we were going to take 39.499 million, and we're able to reduce that by the 8.479, taking our draw on reserves forecast to be 31.020. So that's where we talk about that. And point 11, we've been very clear to talk about the exceptional financial support we've got with the capitalisation directive and that reserve position. So we want to be really transparent and clear to the reader, members of the public, especially in terms of our position, in terms of actually we're trying to reduce the withdrawal reserves, because as an authority we really need to protect our reserves. If we just go down through the report, section 12 just provides a bit more details in terms of the services around where they've forecast an increase or decrease on the figure that they reported for month 5. Of course, we still have the standard appendices where each service is spoken about in more detail for members to go and to review that. If we move into section 13, we brought into the report the dedicated schools grant, and this is really significant because it's now forecasting an overspend of 28.259 million. This is significant for members to note because at the moment that's off balance sheet because there's a statutory override in place by government, but should that come off, which is forecast to come off, and a permanent solution is not found, that could be a potential draw on the council's reserves. In terms of mitigations, section 14 talks a lot about the mitigations that were in place, and you can see we brought these into the report before in terms of things we're looking at. We've also included in there a focus on commissioning of suitable children's placements, including step down. So that's where we're recognising the additional work that's needed in children's and families to try and reduce some of that draw on external placements. The next section, section 15 onwards, talks about the MTF pay savings and the monitoring of these. The table on table 2 on the top of page 19 shows the amount that's been achieved on track, at risk, unachievable. So it actually shows now that we've achieved 34%. We would expect this to be significantly higher. And this is something that we are flagging and working with services around. Actually, we need to get all of these percentage, 52% is on track. We need to get them into that achieve box. If those savings aren't delivered, that is going to have a significant effect on next year's budget, because the gap for next year's budget is predicated on these savings being delivered. And if they're not, we need to know that now. And so we're working very closely in terms of making sure that they are delivered. There has been an improvement in terms of the percentage that's gone up into being achieved, but at this stage in the financial year, we would be expecting that to be more. And that's where we're working closely with services, and that's shown in the chart below. As this is a quarterly report, the next sections where we talk about the spend control board, treasury management and the collection fund, those are all additional items that come into the quarterly report. It's important to note here that actually for the collection fund, those council tax collection rates, so actually collected at the end of Q2 was 57.04 against a target of 56.72. So we're actually slightly up on what we were expecting to collect there. And you'll see we were also up on the amount of business rates that we were forecast to collect there. So that's a positive. There's a separate debtor management appendix, which talks about the sundry debt invoicing that's in place and the debt recovery in relation to those. And we've also included an appendix which talks about reserves, which is in section 25. So that's revenue. If we then move on to capital, which then just flows down through the report, you'll see there in table 3, it shows the original budget there on page 22 of 268.721 million. So that's what we set at the budget setting. That's what we said we were going to forecast to spend on capital this financial year. And in Q1, we saw that reduced to 195 million. And then in Q2, we're seeing that further reduce again to 119.319. So it's good in the fact that officers are profiling the spend correctly. However, in terms of the delivery of what we said we were going to deliver, we're not delivering as much as we said we would. But in terms of us being able to use those updated figures to reflect our revenue position for year end, that puts us in a stronger position to be able to now use those forecast numbers to look at anything that we may need in terms of borrowing in that. Just if you go on to section 30, it talks about the estimated spend being 114.116. So that's just there's new appendices, and I hope you've all noticed that there's a new appendix O in the report, which talks about in detail, it shows the schemes per directorate. It also talks about the slippage, the forecast outturn, and any changes in budget. So that's quite a good new addition in the way that we're presenting this report. And Appendix P actually shows the funding against each of the schemes. So members can go in and see of their schemes that are in place, how much is actually coming in as external funding against how much is grants and contributions. And you'll actually see that the majority of our capital programme is funded by grants and contribution, and actually there's the smaller percentages the external debt in terms of borrowing to achieve in our schemes. Just in terms of additional funding, we add any additions to the capital programme, if they are externally funded, those get added into the programme. But if there were anything that was added to the programme that would subject the council to borrowing, that would be a council decision. So that would have to go up to council to get added to the capital programme. So we generally will do that as a one-off if it's absolutely fundamental, but generally try to do that at budget setting, just so we're not having to take the report up. But yeah, that's all I've got to say on the report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Does Maria want to come in at this stage? She's online.
No, that's absolutely fine, Chair. I'll come in after if there are any questions from members. Thank you.
Right, who's got any questions? I think this is unbelievable. Yes, Peter.
My question relates to the capital programme. Peter Seed, by the way, for those listening online. Am I right in thinking that if we have an externally funded capital project with the project management costs capitalised as part of the project, that a slippage is merely as under resourcing and failing to actually get on with something which is fully funded?
It might not just be under resourcing, so it could be that they've experienced problems with, say, getting the proper planning regulations, say, or it could be delay with materials, actually getting contractors to bid to do the work. So there's varying factors as well as potentially resources for us to deliver the project. But I think we need to be careful here in terms of not blaming all of the resources to get projects delivered, because there are other factors that come into play here in terms of those delivery of those. But I think in each of there's an appendix which talks about the non-delivery and the delays. So I think I'd refer you to, if you've got a particular question in relation to a particular scheme, to have a look and see whether the detail is in the appendix. And if not, I'll answer any question.
Further, Peter? Happy?
Thanks, Chair. I've got a number of questions, but I'll start just on the same subject matter as Councillor C on the capital slippage. For me, one of the things is and I could go back through the documents, and I'm probably going to have to, but I'm just interested to know what the slippage was last year as well, to see if that kind of compare from year on year, how we're doing on that. I know there'll be different reasons for them. But looking at this, I appreciate Appendix O, found that really helpful. But for me, I'd really like to know more detail about what projects are being affected. For example, looking at the sheet, I think it's about 10 million in total on bridge structures, road structures, active travel. And I appreciate that's a high level kind of thing, but knowing specifically which projects, and also I'd like to know kind of, are these projects which were slipped last year and therefore, and again slipped this year? There's kind of not enough detail, I don't think, in the report to be able to give enough scrutiny on that. And also again, picking up on Peter's point, the reasons for slippage. I know we can give a general one, perhaps under resourcing or other things, but do you have, or is there specifics to each particular project that's been slipped, to see if there's kind of a common theme running through as to why? And I'm also concerned when we do look at slippage, and I know, Nicola, you mentioned that happened last year as well, as we know, is the effect on these projects on delivery. We know that some of these projects, there are time constraints, particularly if they're from government funding, such as Bridgewater Town Deal, or the Levelling Up Fund for Bridgewater, which I know is under pressure, particularly the Levelling Up Fund, with time constraints there. And it also concerns me with slippage, the inevitable, in most cases, increase in cost, because what costs £1 million today doesn't cost £1 million tomorrow. So if there's anything that officers could be doing to avoid that slippage, I'd be interested to know. And just one example on there is the Staple Grove Housing Infrastructure Fund, which is noted as well, which is of concern. And that's probably the one question or one thing on slippage that if you wanted to give a response to, then I'll come back on a couple of other points.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I think I'm still working with the team in terms of the level of detail reported in that appendix, and things like where you spoke about bridges, I have asked them to break that down, and we're still working on getting that level of detail into the report. So I think it will come. It just wasn't available for this report, but I have asked them to include that. I cannot speak to the team about including the appendix for why, when things slip, actually tracking that through, so we have that recorded in there to bring that level in. And so you can analyse it to see whether there are any common themes, and actually will there be a detrimental effect in terms of us not receiving that grant funding that had been promised. It hasn't been flagged to either myself or Maria of the impact of this slippage having that negative effect in terms of we're going to lose that grant funding. I haven't been notified of that as present, so I don't think that is a factor, and we work very hard with MHCLG to make sure that we are being transparent in our returns when we say about when spend is likely to go, when they work with us in terms of that. So, but I'm happy to incorporate that into the report.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers and looking at that in more detail in the future. So just 3 other points on this report, Chairman, if I may. On the point of the reduction in the overspend of 8.4 million, which I think is positive, the only question I'd have, and this is being naive and not knowing, is there a reason why there's the reduced draw on reserves rather than the reduced draw on capitalisation directive? Because not knowing how things work, I would say, if possible, you wouldn't get as much capitalisation directive, because that will have a knock-on effect on how much you have to pay back over the years. Is there a reason for that?
Come in, Maria.
Thank you so much. Through you, Chair. Yes, it's all about keeping as much of our financial resilience as possible. So if we're not drawing on the reserves, so we can keep our reserves in terms of our financial resilience. In terms of the exceptional financial support, we're planning on financing that using capital receipts. So drawing on that to bridge the gap is the one that we want to maximise, and actually not drawing on our earmarked reserves is, in fact, if we came in under by 80 million, we wouldn't be drawing on either one of them, and then we'd be truly underspending. But anything within that 80 million region that we've got these one-offs is not a true underspend. So it's just about preserving our financial resilience using our reserves.
Thank you, Chair. And just the final 2. One of them is around the council, the collection rates. I only wondered if if there's any comparisons with other local authorities, similar sized local authorities on the collection rates, and also does the figures that were there, are we anticipated therefore to collect more than kind of what was forecasted overall this year, seeing as there's a slight improvement? And the second question, which I'll give, and then I'll stop at the same time, is just looking at the outstanding debt position on chart 3. I just wondered, with that debt, are you expected to collect all of that debt? And I do recall as well a previous meeting where we talked about licensing. It might have been at a licensing meeting, not at this one, where from memory there was a high volume but low value outstanding debts. And one of the questions or asks was, how can that be improved? Because it can give the impression that you can get away with small debts if you're in licensing and not having to pay up. So I was just wondering if there was any change in how that's kind of done, working practice around that.
I make that question 4, Councillor Rodriguez, not question 2. Maria.
So through you, Chair, just to take them in sequence. So are there any comparisons for council tax collection? Each local authority will bake into their medium-term financial strategy the collection rate that they believe they should be trying to get to. So the comparisons aren't strictly comparable because it depends on where other local authorities are with their collection. Ours is doing exceptionally well here, and I think, and I'll stand to be corrected, but my understanding is that we've got a 98% collection rate built into the medium-term financial plan and strategy. So this is the profile during the year. So it's really good to see. Also, we don't just collect the in-year collection, we are collecting a total collection. So this is the in-year collection, but actually the team will be endeavouring to collect anything that's outstanding from previous financial years as well, and with great success. They're doing an exceptional job, and we track all of that through. In terms of the debt management and the volume of debt that's outstanding, our job is to try and collect all of that debt. At the end of the financial year, we're expected to make a bad debt provision for any debts that are going to be doubtful in terms of collection, and depending on the age of the debt and the type of the debt, we'll have a different bad debt provision expected. That's not to say that we don't expect everyone to still be collecting that debt, so they absolutely should be, and we should be doing everything that we can because it underpins the medium-term financial strategy. If I can go back to a question on the capital programme, if I may, just looking at the Q2 report from last year, the slippage was 85,653,000, and at outturn it was 196,890,000 pounds worth of slippage. So I hope, I can't remember which member the question came from, but I hope that provides some context. I would also urge anyone looking at the capital programme to think of it, particular programme lines, to think of them as total programmes over multiple years. And I think we need to become better at, when we're slipping the money and the budget, to slipping it to the right financial year that it should appear in and phasing it correctly. It's something I'm looking at, the phasing of the capital programme, as we go towards the budget setting in February, so that we have the right profiling of the capital programme for the entire capital programme's life over the multiple years. I think historically we may have just slipped into the following financial year and then just perpetuated this slippage. So we are looking to see how we can phase it more appropriately.
Moving on now, Councillor Clark, please. Sorry, do you want to come in, Nikki?
I was just going to add to the question about sundry debtor income that I'm actually working with the team at the minute to look at different methods of receipt of payment rather than the raising of an invoice. So allowing the customer to pay at the point of order more so than an invoice being raised, and therefore us getting that debt to do debt recovery. But we just, haven't got there yet.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Question for the officer. I'm new to this committee. I'm only here today, actually. There's a lot of this that I don't understand. But the original capital budget of 268 million, 149 has been slipped into future years or pushed into future years probably is a better description.
That's correct.
What's the implications of that for next year's budget if you're picking up slippage of 149 from this year? And you're also picking up slippage from last year, if I understood your opening comments correctly. Is this all not going to catch up with somebody one day? Or are we just going to write off these projects that we're supposed to be doing and we won't do because we can't afford to?
No, because it's a capital programme, so we would normally see slippage go between financial years. It's not the same as revenue, so we would normally see it go between there. And actually, for us, a lot of the slippage, as you'll see in the funding attributable to our capital programme, a lot of it is grants and contributions. So in some cases, it's where we've had money in, and therefore we've got that money and there it's already been received, or we've got to have the receipt of that money into us will be a part of a claim that goes into government. Once the work has been done, that claim goes in and then they pay us the money. So there's not actually, in terms of the borrowing, we do borrowing at the point that we need it as an authority. So we don't borrow in advance of need, as it were, or we don't borrow for a scheme up front. We do it on a cash flow basis. But I think the point is around with some schemes, if they do slip, they do end up costing the council more, is the point, because materials and different things rise, as we know. So I think that's the point in terms of with some schemes potentially could end up looking to be reduced in terms of what they were going to achieve, be delivered to in order to pay for them.
Lee Redmond, please, and then I'm going to come to the online people. Dave, we've noticed you're there, and you're next after Mr. Redmond. Sorry, Maria, do you want to come back in on that last question?
I was just going to come back in to give some assurance that the slippage from the end of the financial year has already worked its way into this year's budget. So whatever we're slipping into next year's budget, I will pick up as part of my capital review that I'm going to do before we set the February budget and capital programme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lee Redmond, thank you for bringing me in. I'm not a member of the committee, but I'm here observing today, so thank you for the opportunity to speak. A couple of points. I think the important one to start off with is that having been a person that tends to read these reports quite often, I'd like to welcome the format of this report. I think it does make lots of improvements and help for members and for those members that don't always look at it, the changes are beneficial, I would suggest. Just a couple of comments, Chair, and then a question. In specifically talking about the table on page 19, which is about the percentage of proposed savings, just a point of reference, really, we may be doing ourselves down a little bit by talking about only 52% on track, because actually that's ignoring the 34% that's actually achieved. So in real terms, there's an 86% on track going forward. So in real terms, the way it's currently reading is that, as you indicate, there are 13% at risk. So I think that's an important point to try and highlight the fact that our services are working very hard to meet the proposed savings, and that's one of the things that the table is not as positive as it could be. My second point is in relation to bullet point 13, and specifically Appendix C. Those of you that have been putting yourselves through the grinder coming along to children and family scrutiny at the same time would know the concerns that the committee are having in relation to the DSG and the potential threats that it puts upon the council. And the reason I draw the attention is obviously Appendix C helps highlight what the designated school grant is, what it does, and it puts a bit of, as I say, fat around the bones of the information. So I would recommend that when members have the opportunity, they look at Appendix C and have a good read, because I think it's a very positive statement and it makes clear the risk and the process behind that. Finally, my question, Chair. It's wonderful that we've got this report. It's Q2. Things are changing a little. Sorry, forgive me. One more comment beforehand. I welcome the change to balanced position. Members and officers will know my concerns in relation to the fact that we look like we're balancing the books. with the balance, as you highlight in that, it's not necessarily balancing the books because we're borrowing some and we're using some of our reserves. So that's not a true statement. And the fact that we're talking about a balanced position at the end of this year helps clarify that point. Chair, the question. So I welcome the pressure that our finance team are putting on different areas of the business. So my question is, are you content that with the additional pressure that's being applied, it is not impacting service delivery, and as such does not impact those in most need? Thank you, Chair.
Who is taking this one, Maria or Nicola or Liz?
If I may start, Chair, it's a really good challenge to say where we're keeping budgets under control where we can, and we can't in every case, or we've not been able to so far in every case. It's really important that a council like Somerset understands the huge responsibility for the number of people in its care. And we will see as we go through the agenda this afternoon that that comes under lots of different headings. It's not simply the adults, social care and the children's services. It's actually a much wider cohort of people. So I think it's absolutely fair, and the work of all the different scrutinies actually ensures that that is always top of our agenda, that we know. The other thing that we have to bear in mind, and I'm reminded of something that I heard the leader say once, and I've said it plenty of times since, that as a council, we need to make sure we maximise opportunities while we take care of those most in need of our support. So no council of this scale looks after people who need support and does nothing else. It's also about really, really significant inward investment and growth in all terms, economic growth, housing growth, and everything else, and how we take care of the environment while we look after those people who most need our support. And I think when I've on occasion done interviews with people who are really interested in how local authorities work, that's the thing that's most surprised them, is the breadth of the responsibility for a big council. So I'm very happy to hand on to Nicola or Maria or anybody else, any of my lead member colleagues who want to contribute as well. Thank you.
Going to bring Maria in next.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to touch on a couple of the comments that the member made and thank them for raising. The dedicated schools grant is one of our biggest risks in terms of our forecast outturn, and I believe that Nicola's already made reference to this, but however, paragraph 13 and also recommendations H and I, in addition to the appendix, draw members' attention to this. We are forecasting a deficit of £64.199 million as at the end of the financial year. That's where we're forecasting to be. That's almost doubling the deficit that we had at the beginning of the financial year, and it is a significant risk to us if the government does not extend the statutory override. We would be in section 114 territory. So it's really important that we keep reminding everyone of that. In terms of the savings delivery, I welcome the positive comments about the amount that we're on track and how much we've actually achieved to date. One of the reasons we keep the two completely separate, though, is because this budget has already been removed from the budget for individual services since the beginning of the financial year. And to just follow on from Nicola's comment regarding, we would expect these to be fully delivered, not just significantly delivered at this point in the year, but they should have been fully delivered at the beginning of the year. So tracking those savings that have not yet been delivered, that are on track, for me is a big concern if they do not get delivered, because not only will it affect our ability for this financial year in terms of forecast outturn, it also has an impact on our ability for next year as to whether these savings will still be deliverable moving forward. So we want them all delivered before the financial year starts. So we've got a bit more work to do to get these. Well, actually, we've got a lot more work to do to get these all over the line. Anything that's at risk or unachievable, I'm expecting a substitute saving or for them to be in delivery by the next time that we meet. And if there are any substitute savings, they will be substituted publicly and agreed by executive. It will not be something that happens behind the scenes. So members will have full transparency, as will the public.
Thank you. I'm now, oh, you want to come back, Lee?
Speak me, Chair, just a follow up if I could, please. Thank you for the comments and the responses. I think the point that you make about at risk, I'm speaking now as chair of Children's and Family Scrutiny Committee. That would be a good point, because some of the committee chairs have been figuring out, when we have the regular budget reports, what we can be drilling down into to try and get some benefit for scrutiny. And I think what you've indicated, that's a really good example of one of the things, and I will be taking that back to my committee. It's okay having a budget report every month, but where's the substance in that? We can pretty much project where the overspends are going to be. It's more a matter now of perhaps turning our attention to the at-risk savings, proposed savings, and drilling down on them a little bit more. And just for a point of clarification, to extend the statutory override is an interesting point, but I think it's more important to the point. I don't know whether it was Maria or Nicola that made the point. What we need is a government change in perspective in relation to that, because God forbid, overnight, potentially it could turn around from being a hypothetical overspend to one that will dramatically impact. And to say that we're talking about potentially the best part of £70 million by the end of this financial year, we need to be making a lot of noise as council. And I would ask, Chair, whether you'd consider as part of the recommendations, including that the leader may wish to want to make that point more to government in the fact that our concern as a council in relation to the DSG.
Maria?
Thank you. I welcome the comments that have been made, and I would also draw members' attention to the fact that those services that have got forecast overspends, they're not managing within their overall position. There are mitigating action tables that have been included in their appendices. I've just opened the one that's in children's service, so that I could use as an example. Appendix B, there is a table. While it doesn't have financial values against each of those areas that they're mitigating, the expectation will be that there are financial values identified that the services are working towards, so that we have full transparency that if the mitigations were implemented, how far the forecast overspend would come down. As well as avoiding the forecast overspend coming through to fruition at the end of the financial year, because there are actions being taken even before for additional clients that we've forecast into the outturn. So there are some additional features that we're including. I would urge scrutiny committees to drill into areas that are forecasting overspends, look for actions that are being taken to manage those overspends, both on a one-off and an ongoing basis. And the savings delivery, as has already been mentioned. But I would also urge members to look at the tables. Table 1, also, we've split out ongoing and one-off pressures. So we've got full transparency as to what could be dealt with this financial year that won't occur again, and what the rolled up pressure is for the future financial year that we need to address so it doesn't impact next year's budget. And in this report, if we look at table 1, there is just over 18 million of ongoing pressures that need to be addressed. Otherwise, they will have an impact on next year's budget. The rolled forward budget roll forward pressures budget that I have made provision for in the medium term financial plan is 5.9 million. I don't want to have to increase it, otherwise the gap gets bigger, and we can pick that up in the subsequent report. But these are all areas that if scrutiny committees want to, they can drill in a bit more with the relevant service area.
Bill Revens.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the comments, Councillor Redmond. Just to underline that through the LGA and CCN, we are continuing to make the points about DSG to government, and we will do so separately as well. In addition to that, I'm meeting with the 7 MPs who represent the area covered by Somerset Council on Wednesday, and it is on the agenda for them to raise as well. We're very aware that this is an issue that affects all councils that have this responsibility, and we need to find a long-term solution rather than a temporary fix.
Moving online, Dave Mansell.
Thank you, Chair. I will start by just welcoming the comments from both Lee and Bill then in regards to the dedicated schools grant, and pleased to hear the attention is being paid to that, because clearly it is important and could have a significant impact on the council. I've got comments in 3 areas which I hope there can be responses on. The first relates to the chart on page 13, which shows that there has been this time of the year there are underspends in most service areas. The comment I thought worth making there is that it feels like this year the council has had a number of issues, not least the transformation and restructuring programme going on, which has diverted officers away from delivering services in some areas, and there's been vacancies which haven't been filled pending that. I'm also aware that in highways, which comes under climate and place, new contracts started at the beginning of the year, and we've been told that there was staffing issues with those contracts at the beginning because not all the staff came over, and that has affected service delivery on the new highways contracts. The point, I mean, obviously all this is regrettable, but possibly the point that needs to be taken from that is if these underspends are regarded as a guide to future spending needs in these areas, they are likely to be misleading. So I think care is needed on these underspends, because they in some cases will be representing a build-up of services not delivered, maintenance not happening, which will need to happen in the future. So that's one point. The second one is much more minor, but I feel I should draw attention to it. It's on page 52, and to do with the one of the key performance indicators on residual waste there. I've been fairly gently mentioning this now for probably a couple of years since we've had this chart presented to us. It's unfortunate that there's a lot of what can be called noise in this chart, in that it's meant to be recording how much residual waste is collected, and it is doing that, and it's hopefully telling us whether there's any odd things going on there or whether it's going up or down. A problem is, especially when viewing it from month to month, as this invites us to do, is that the number of collection days in a month varies considerably, not least when according to where the weekends fall. As I say, I've raised this many times. What needs to happen is the indicator needs to be done on a different basis, so it's not so affected by the number of collection days. And I mention it now because there's a comment on it as well. It says this graph shows a decrease in tonnages for June with a bounce back in July. Actually, what's happened between those 2 months is there's a different number of collection days. So surprise, surprise, there's a different amount of residual waste collection. It's minor, but it's been sitting there for a long time, and really should be altered, so we have an indicator that actually indicates something that we're interested in. Third comment, and this is related to the savings and how well they're being delivered. So interested in the discussion already occurred on this. Lee, your glass appears to be half full. Regrettably, mine is looking a bit more half full or less these days, because I was paying back
You've frozen out, Dave. I'm gonna, while you reconnect, ask Richard, who wants to come in, to talk about highways, and either Maria or Nicola, if they wish to answer some of the questions.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And can I just say, as a previous Vice Chair to this committee, yeah, I share your views on Councillor Filmer and his brilliant chairing of this committee, and I think he will be sadly missed as chair. But we move forward. On the point that Councillor Mansell brought up on our new procurement and our transfer from the previous arrangements, I think he's a little unfair. During this time, we had an unprecedented amount of defects at Somerset Council, and we have actually, or the new contractors have dealt with far more than they have ever before. And yes, obviously, with a transfer, that there are some particular issues that have come up over staffing, but they dealt with them very quickly. And we've done a programme of surface dressing, which is the largest in years. We've mended more potholes than we have on previous occasions, and to a better standard. So I think it's a little bit unfair to say that that has been a serious problem, because we generally have performed better than we have for years, I think, on that. On the waste, I take what you're saying, and I'll ask that to be looked into. But thank you,
Maria.
I'm going to let Nicola come in. I think she's got a response on the waste one, and then I'll come in at the end.
I've just to confirm, we'll get that chart amended as per the comment around it being needing to be shown in a different way. Just going back to the comment where the question or comment around underspends, and this may be on staffing or kind of reductions in teams at the minute. That with all underspends that are showing in this financial year, we do an analysis of whether they will remain an underspend or whether they are one-off underspends, and so we are tracking that. And from the underspend the council saw last year in its revenue budget, we've done an analysis of that as well, in terms of whether it was what was one-off, what was ongoing, has there been an impact on this financial year, will there be an impact on next financial year. So we are picking all of that up in the work that we're doing.
Dave, do you want to come back in with your frozen out third question?
Yes, thank you. I've turned my camera off, and thank you for the responses, which were helpful on both of those. Thank you. Yes, the third area I wish to raise was in relation to the savings which were expected this year, and particularly the ones that are down as unachievable and at risk. And there's quite a number of them across the service areas. I notice in particular there's several in related to IT, and also several related to waste. I can't help saying that if that's how these end up, and the unachievable ones in particular, the signs are that it will do, according to how they're being described, that does feel like quite a failure. These were savings that were offered to us and were said to be deliverable in this year. So to now be finding out that in fact they're unachievable is not very good, and I think does need to be noted. I was pleased to hear the comments from Maria in this regard, and that clearly this is going to is going to have some close attention to it. And I had noticed that it says that alternatives to savings will be sought. So also welcome the comments that that will be publicly reported and going to executive what the alternatives are, because clearly alternatives haven't been approved by full council. So I'm sort of slightly wondering about, you know, how that should go through, because it feels like that should really be the route. And really those savings should have been delivered. They were offered up as deliverable, and now we're failing, the council is failing to deliver them. And with that regard, and as a final comment on this one, I think we need some explanation. We should be told what has happened on these. Why have some become unachievable? Why are others now at risk? So could I suggest that be added to future reports? And clearly the other scrutiny committees also need to be able to get into this and understand what's been occurring. And I will mention that Climate and Place has asked about the waste ones that come under the remit there, and was told the matters are confidential and so can't be reported to us. Well, I think we need a confidential report if that's the case. This information should not be kept from members, so we're in the dark and not know what's going on. But as I hope I've done, I wish to shine a little bit of a spotlight on those and to request further information and hopefully see their delivery in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Who wants to answer this? Maria? Nikki?
Yes, of course,
Liz?
Chair. Happy to come in.
Maria, I just wonder if we can start by just saying that full council approves the budget, and then within that envelope of that budget, any changes then come to executive for approval as changes. Correct me, either Maria or Nicola, if I have that wrong.
That is correct, and at the moment those services haven't come up with an alternative saving to be considered. So that's why we're pushing the services to see whether they can come up with an alternative saving that would deliver the same financial value that's been built into their budget. But at this point in time, they have been unable to identify anything for the executive to consider.
You want to come in now, Maria?
Yes, please. So I wholly agree with Nicola's response. I would just also ask members to consider that we've got 15 at-risk savings, and we have 7 savings that are labelled as unachievable. And I think it's important to understand why they're not currently being delivered. For me, what's more important is where is the substitute or the mitigating action that means that the saving could still be delivered, but it won't be delivered to the time and profile that we originally agreed as part of the savings. So is it a one-off substitution and a mitigating action, or indeed does it need to be fully substituted on an ongoing basis? And I would urge us to be looking at that in that space, because that's about helping our financial resilience and sustainability, and not having savings that are undeliverable just being explained as to why they're not being delivered. I think we should understand why they're not being delivered, but we need the solutions to come forward as to how we are going to see the financial envelope being adhered to.
Thank you, everybody. I intend to take the recommendations en bloc, unless I have anyone wishing to vote against that particular thing. Could I have a proposer and a seconder? Peter Seed, thank you. Simon Coles, thank you. Could we please vote on the recommendations that are before you? Right, and anyone against? Anyone abstaining? Barry Clark's abstained. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, you three. I think you're staying in place. And we'll move on to the next. We're actually 2 minutes ahead of time still at the moment. It won't last long. Right, item number 7, please.
which is the Housing Revenue Account and Capital Budget Monitoring Report. Liz, are you speaking first?
Chair, I believe Councillor Smith-Roberts may be on the call. If so, I believe that she will speak first.
Are you there?
I'm not on my own. Chair, you would not want me on my own with the size of budget for this council, I assure you. I know that Councillor Smith-Roberts would say that on the revenue side of the HRA report, that good and positive work has been done to reduce the forecast overspend, but that there is considerably more work to be done in finding mitigations for the proposed, not proposed, but the forecast overspend areas, and that work is ongoing. On the capital, we do, of course, consider that there is, again, slippage on this, but I will hand over, I think, to Nicola for detail on this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. I'll just point out a couple of things, because as you'll see, the format of this report, we've tried to align now with the general fund report so that it all flows, so members have one understanding of the makeups of our report. So as Councillor Lation said about the overspend there, we do actually have in point 23, so the report talks about income and expenditure and the swings that they're getting or the movement in both of those. But in point 23, I turn your attention to the mitigation section. So much like the general fund, we have for the HRA put that mitigation section in as well, where we expect some elements to be looked at in terms of bringing that forecast back to a balanced position for year end. So that's included in there. And also just in terms of capital there, the table below in table 3, that section, so in section 25 there, you'll see that the difference there in terms of the total budget that was forecast for the year there, the actual spend and the forecast outturn, which has got slippage there also with 37 million. And the appendices that are referred to as appendix B, A and B in the report are those capital programmes, which then we're trying to get the format of those the same as the general funds. There's a table that shows how the expenditure is made up and any movements in that, and then the funding of that side there. But happy to take any questions, or Kerry Prisco is also online if there's any technical questions that I can't answer.
Thank you very much. Is anybody wanting to come in on this report? Yes, Councillor Rodriguez.
Thanks, Chair. Just two quick ones. Just finding the page, I think it was 119. Just going to it. Just a quick one on the write-offs during 24-25 for quarter 1 and 2. Obviously, there's quite a difference between the Homes and Sedgemoor figures and the in-house service. I only wonder if any work's being done to kind of understand what's being done differently, or if it's anything specific that's impacting one model compared to another. That's the first one. And the second one on Appendix B, which is the slippage, it's kind of really the same comments as previously around slippage, just concern around the effect on deliverability in future years because of cost pressures. And I also do notice, and I'm hoping you may be able to give, or someone may be able to give some further detail on the slippage of the fire safety element for in-house service, just to give us some reassurance that that's going to not have a detrimental effect or risk to residents.
Kerry, okay.
Kerry,
hello.
Are you speaking to this?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your questions. So in terms of the write-offs, I would probably have to get more further detail from the service if I'm not able to answer the question sufficiently for yourself today. From what I understand, with the in-house service, they have been reviewing a number of aged debts from former tenants in the first quarter, and that piece of activity did deliver a number of write-offs, as shown, where debt recovery attempts had not been able to reach a satisfactory conclusion in those situations. From a point of view from Appendix B, just to inform you that a number of the slippage on the social housing development schemes line, as represented in the appendices, that is planned, where it's referring to, for example, North Taunton, where the project is planned to be spent over a number of different years, so that slippage is expected, and delivery is fine in terms of that respect. And with regards to fire safety, from what I understand, the delay has been around the tendering process and awarding the contract process. But again, if you would like further information and detail in that specific example, I would have to refer to the service for yourselves.
Just to thank the response and as much detail on the fire safety stuff, because if there's any risk to this council as a result of not doing those pieces of work, I think it's something that us as a committee should be fully aware of.
Thank you very much, Councillor C.
Thank you, Chairman. Not so much a question as a comment. Paragraph 23, the mitigations and the work on voids. The issue of voids and the turnaround time and expenditure to turn around came up in an audit discussion a couple of months ago, as a result of which I had a meeting with the officers concerned. I was very impressed. I think they've done a lot of very good work and are headed in exactly the right direction on this. So I have my fingers crossed for a really good outcome. And the important thing is, of course, it's a good outcome for residents. It's not just hitting our back pocket. It's adding to the queue.
You want to reply, Kerry? No?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Very much. Right. Anybody else? I don't think so. Right. We have a number of recommendations for executive. Are we willing to take them on block again? If so, can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Simon Coles, Andy Sagden. And those in favour, please. Thank you. Those against? Those abstaining? Councillor Clark again. Moving on. Thank you for everything. Get the right page. Unbelievably, we're gaining time. Shh. Right, Liz, would you like to introduce this subject, please? Corporate Performance Monitoring Report, Q2.
Thank you, Chair. I think this report is a report that could and should gain greater relevance and importance in the work we do as we move through transformation and improvement of the council, and particularly when we actually look at the report. The one thing that I really most want to see, and that what will be most relevant to members, is where we have local performance, not just national performance indicators. So this is something we've talked about. Many of us talk about planning and our concerns for planning, and then we can look at these national indicators and see green and not recognise it locally. So one of the things that I really want us to work on, and this is something where every single member can contribute, is to understand exactly what matters to us under each of the directorates and ensure that we use that requirement, that need, that desire for proper performance indicators within our quarterly report. Some of them will be annual, some of them will be things that we do annually anyway. Some of them will be things that we may not even have thought about yet, but that are really important to us. So if I may, Chair, I'd like to hand over to Sarah Scrutiny. Sarah knows exactly how much these local performance indicators matter to me, and I believe that I'm representing all members when I say that. Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Lyshan. So the report that you have in front of you today sets out our performance against the agreed set of interim performance indicators. As Councillor Lyshan says, we are currently in the process of reviewing the set of measures to not only better reflect each council plan priority and also provide a more even distribution amongst those council plan priorities, but also to be really clear that we are, and I like this phrase, measuring what matters. So when Councillor Lyshan talks about the difference between our national indicators and our local indicators, we have a set of indicators, actually many, many more than are in this performance report, that we report to central government as part of our statutory returns. And those quite often you'll see in the code that goes along it, you'll see an NI for national indicator. There are also performance measures that matter to us as a council. So there's data within this that we want to be looking at, want to be monitoring, making sure that we understand how we are performing. And part of the review that we are doing is looking at which of those measures should also be included within the quarterly performance reports. So Appendix A to this report sets out the performance indicators in more detail. Following previous feedback, we've made some changes. You'll have heard us talk about our new performance and risk management system, IdeaGen. This report has been produced through that system. We have included the narrative for where appropriate next to the performance indicator so that you can read that across more easily. It's also worth just mentioning that at our Performance Risk and Budget Board, we did our first targeted deep dive looking at performance, risk and budget in a particular area. And the first one was on the fostering service. As a result of that deep dive, we actually included 2 additional measures within our quarterly performance report. A programme of further deep dives is planned for throughout the year. Also, this report now contains several housing measures that reflect joint reporting between Homes in Sedgemoor and Somerset Council in-house provision. And we've backdated that, so we've got the information on Q1. Just a couple of things to point out that actually we had some gaps when we published the paper, just to explain. So, for example, on the substance misuse measure, that's now been updated since the papers were published as amber. And we are continuing to see an increase in the number of adults in treatment as we work towards our 20% increase. The other thing just to mention is our not in education, employment or training NEETs measure, where we have an expected data lag, because in the autumn, especially before December, we don't have the definitive data on who is enrolled or remained in college. So what happens is colleges conduct a review and they submit their report and later, so we should see that come through in our next quarter. Over to you for questions.
Questions. I can like to make the point, this point, that specific in detail questions about some of the items on here are going to be better brought before the Pacific Scrutiny Committee that actually deals with them. But very happy to take questions at this stage if anyone wants to ask any.
Chair, with knowledge of how much members value scrutiny, I wonder whether each of the scrutiny committees might want to look at the key performance indicators that are included in here and that are relevant to the areas each scrutiny covers, and actually feed back to this scrutiny committee where they think there may be gaps or where they would like more information.
I would think that's a pretty good idea, but I'm willing to take anybody's views. Peter.
Chair, I agree with that. I mean, I'm a little surprised it's not normal practice to take any relevant information about service areas to the relevant scrutiny committee anyway. This is supposed to be corporate here. We should be looking at the whole, but that doesn't mean that we go and do the individual specialisms in the same way. We're not experts on adult social care or children's services. So, you know, surely that makes a lot of sense.
Sarah.
Hi, just to say that in each of those individual, so you will get service specific reports in those areas, which will actually go into more detail. I think what would be really helpful is to understand these ones that are reported quarterly at our corporate performance level, whether we're focusing on the right ones.
Chair, if I just come back on that, I think what I'd really be intending is that the comments which appear against the KPI to explain it had passed scrutiny with the relevant committee. You know, there's a lot of jargon which is nuanced in, you know, for example, returned care packages, which I did think might have been left with a neighbour, but it just seems very odd that you know, the relevant committee hasn't you know, been through and made sure that the comment that we're receiving against that is something that they're happy expresses the truth of the matter.
Do anyone want to come back on that?
I'd just like to say I think traffic works in one way, going from this scrutiny committee and this report to the other scrutiny committees. I think what I was just picking up as possibly lacking is the traffic back from the specialist scrutiny committees back into this committee, and therefore I realise it's not going to happen before a quarterly report is published, but I think it can be useful to come back before the next quarterly report is published with any specific comments or considerations or concerns.
Well, before you come back, Peter, I would like to change the recommendation to say that we return the individual pieces of this report to the scrutiny committee, and we get the chairs to report back to this committee in January, which gives them time in the next cycle for everyone to have met. Are we all happy with that? And then Peter.
Chair, I was thinking, just in order to free up an effective cycle, maybe it would be wise to ask the chairs of the scrutiny committee to review the KPIs in their area and leave it to their discretion as to what they take back to their scrutiny committee, and just ask them to endorse the comments before they come here. Because I think, you know, there is a degree of reliance you can place on the chair to be able to read a committee and what's consensus and what's not.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Rodriguez, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one to say, recognise the new ones on there, which I welcome, particularly around the housing one. So thank you for bringing that forward. But I did have just one small specific question, Chair, if I may, and if the answer is not available, then happy for someone else to give it to me. Just wondering on the on page 12, when it talks about the EHC assessments completed within 20 weeks, I only wondered whether that the negative figure there, is that because there's an increase in demand, or just any background information to that as well, if it's available?
Yep, no, I've seen Lee. I've got him next. Anything to come back on? No, Lee, all yours.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points, just for clarity. I know that as speaking as chair of the Children and Families Scrutiny Committee, I welcome the opportunity to look at more things, not that we haven't got anything else to be doing with our time, of course. But just a couple of points and in feeding back really in relation to it, and it possibly helps with the EHCP assessment question previously. Those of you that will be aware know that I harp on continually about our corporate parenting board and the fact that there's needed. So just do a bit of reassurance in the first instance. The corporate parent board has this information on every time they meet in relation to our children looked after and the levels for some of the questions there. So although Children and Family Scrutiny does look at these numbers when it's highlighted. Our corporate parenting board are on the ball, as it were, when it comes to challenging both the HCPs, our children not in education, etc., etc. And the neat numbers is one that comes up on a regular basis. I use this opportunity to advertise the fact that all members of council are corporate parents, and they're more than welcome to come along to our meetings in the same way our papers and agendas and reports are fully available. The corporate parenting board is a wonderful way to see how seriously we take the care of our children. And it also is important to remember that, as forgive me for putting words in the leader of council's mouth, the need for foster carers is something that we would go on about on a regular basis. We can make our children's lives better by giving them the opportunities that they deserve, and education, health and care plans, a home are all priorities that we need to be working at, and every member of council, every officer in this council can be playing their part in this. Off of soapbox.
Heather.
Forgive me for coming in from the back row here, but I didn't quite hear. I think you said something about a negative number on EHCPs, but I thought you might have been referring, and I might have misheard you, but I think you're referring possibly, Councillor Rodriguez, to number 10, which is the percentage of education healthcare plans committed within 20 weeks. Was that the one on page 12 you were concerned about, or was it a different one? I'm more than happy to try to explain it.
Yeah, no, that's the one. Yeah, the 26.09% figure for last quarter. Yeah.
Thank you. Quite rightly. That's one that keeps us awake at nights as well. We have in the past used different ways to try to improve the speed with which we can produce our EHCP plans. We haven't been going in the right direction in quarter 2, as you can see. Our plans around restructuring, which we were doing anyway ahead of the kind of restructuring that's gone on around the council-wide restructuring, was about trying to improve that process. That's been going on now for about 2 or 3 months, I think. I remember watching one of the very early doors EHCP process planning meetings to try and smooth out the delays that we build into the system ourselves. So we're on this one very, very closely. I'll be hoping that percentage looks better for the next quarter, but it's something that, you know, there are lots of reds on here that I'm not happy with, and that's one of the big ones. We also can see ourselves benchmarked against other organisations, you know, our kind of statistical neighbours and so on, something lovingly called the tartan rug, which is this massive kind of beautiful trellis work of how well people do. And sadly, the colour on our bit of the tartan rug on this one is not good either. We're not the only ones, but we don't want to be in that particular box. So we are working on it, and it is something that our restructuring should actually help us with.
Forgive me, Chair, I just found the bit that I was looking for, particularly in relation to EHCPs, to help Councillor Rodriguez. Both the council asked our external audit to look at the way that EHCPs are done, and there's a report that's, I think, coming to the next audit committee that specifically looks at the percentage of the ability of how it does. And just for clarity, it also came to Children and Family Scrutiny in the September meeting, and what I'll do, I'll share in the chat the links to the appropriate bodies.
Okay, I'm going to change. Well, I'm going to suggest. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to bring your attention to Appendix A, page 21, which is the last page. It's red and amber, and it talks about vacancies, new starters, leavers, apprentices. The figures to me are very, very strange in the fact that we've got over 1,000 vacancies, and we've got 93 starters and only 187 leavers. It doesn't all make sense to me. Perhaps I'm reading it wrong, but could somebody explain it, please? Page 21 of Appendix A, the last page. And I think this one would fall between the cracks of your idea of going back to the chairs, because it wouldn't fall with anybody.
It's page 155, report page 21. Do you want to come in, Alan?
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best to answer the question, and if Dawn Betridge is online, I'm sure she can correct me if I get any of this wrong. So first and foremost, whilst these are not the performance figures we would like to see within the organisation, they are certainly performance figures you would expect, given the restructuring that we're going through at the moment in terms of the number of vacancies. So Maria has already referenced, and so has Nicola Hicks, the budget impact of holding a number of vacancies whilst we await the restructuring. So they are a product of that process. So a number of services, as they go through these processes, are holding vacancies, are effectively holding those back in anticipation of the restructuring that will take place from the 1st of April next year. Obviously, we're going through that consultation at the moment. So whilst those figures are higher than we would like to do, it is a product of that. Partly as well, again, given the change that the organisation is going through, we are experiencing an increased level of sickness within our staff cohort because of the nature of the work that they are doing and the uncertainty that the restructuring is presenting, hence why these figures are presented the way they are. Once we go through the process of restructuring, we'll have to then invest in our people strategy to make sure we're building up those teams, but regrettably, this is one of those impacts associated with our programme as it currently is. Thank you, Chair.
You want to come back to that?
Just come back and say timescale is by the end of this financial year.
Chair, through you, if I may. So as part of the restructuring process, as you'll know, the budget was set in February earlier this year that included a significant contribution from reductions in our pay bill, so effectively staff savings. So the restructuring that we're going through currently is to ensure that those new structures are in place by the 1st of April, so they don't take effect from, they take effect from that point, but the work is being completed now to make sure that we have a full year effect for all those savings. So the work around consulting staff is underway and completes next week. And once that's completed, we'll be able to unpack all of that consultation response and then confirm the final structures for the organisation and make that recommendation. So as part of that process, that's why it'll be a full year effect. And then any recruitment processes, any final redundancy process will take place between January and the March 31st to ensure we have a final structure in place and operating by the 1st of April. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? Okay, the recommendation that I'm asking the committee to consider is for each scrutiny committee to review the Q2 24-25 performance monitoring reports and future performance monitoring reports, and to report back to the scrutiny committee corporate resources with any specific recommendations on additional management actions or other mitigations, and scrutiny committee forward work programmes amended to reflect this. Is the committee happy with that recommendation? Could I have a proposer and a seconder? Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Simon. Can I have vote, please, from the committee on that? That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on, we are going to go on to agenda item 9. Do you wish to change the people sitting in front of me here? Agendas. One of those things. Okay, Theo, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is just to introduce, as you are very used to seeing, the Improvement and Transformation Programme November progress update. This covers the 12th of October to the 8th of November, but doubtless if you ask, you'll receive updates on what's happened since then. The report covers obviously the workforce programme, which is at the forefront of many of our minds at the moment, as that is that is ongoing. The consultation on the restructuring is ongoing. That closes on the 7th of December, and I'd encourage all staff and members to take part in that wherever possible. It covers the improvement and change element, including particularly the digital elements, and of course the partnership and localities programme, to which I know members will have questions on devolution. I will hand over to Louise Routley, the author of the report, who will go into greater detail.
Thanks, Theo. So as Theo's highlighted, the report provides a progress update on the Improvement Transformation Programme for the month from the 12th of October to the 8th of November. The programme continues to make significant progress, as summarised in the report, across the various work streams. However, our current primary focus is on the workforce programme and the whole council restructure. Our update also, the main body of the report contains the update, and the latest risk report is contained within Appendix A on page 167 of the agenda papers. A summary of the changes to the risks since the last update in October is detailed on page 160. And also, following feedback from Scrutiny in October, all risks are now being reviewed and updated on a monthly basis, and the risk report now includes more narrative against mitigating actions in the overall risk update by the risk owner. There, just to highlight, there is an error for risk ITP 009, excessive loss of staff with talent and organisational knowledge, as turnover is expected to increase because of voluntary and compulsory redundancies. The inherent risk shows as 15, it should actually show as 25. That error has been rectified within our risk management software, IdeaGen, and future reports will show the correct details. There aren't any new risks during the reporting period, and we've not closed any risks during the reporting period. Over to questions.
Any questions? Councillor Seed, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I really like the way that risk is presented in the risk review. It makes it very much easier to see the
Hold on a minute, Louise, can you turn your...
I really like the way the risk is represented in the main risk report table. It makes it very much easier to understand the dynamics and how, and also to judge the mitigations that you're proposing to see if they've been reasonably scored. That for me is best in class that I've seen so far. One thing that does worry me a little bit is that we have a single absolute score of impact, and we do not necessarily have time represented well in this layout. Some of these risks, there is a time frame you've got to actually take hold of a situation in order to get an effective grip on it, and a time frame for that effective grip to actually show up in the results. And some of them appear to me to be particularly sensitive in that regard, in that it will take us a while to get on top of the problem, and it will take a while to carry out the mitigation. Can you just say some things about how time is represented in your master system?
Who wants to come back on that?
Sorry, sharing the mic around here. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we are looking at is making sure that each of the mitigating actions have a due date against them, recognising that actually in terms of making sure that we are impacting on these risks at the appropriate time. What I will do is, or what we will do is we will go back and have a look and just make sure that we're really clear on each of the risks, the time limited nature overall, that what we have amended the report to do is to be really clear around the time frame for each of the mitigating actions. Once those are 100% complete, once they've been reported, they'll then move into the existing controls, and then you'll see the change to the current score because we've taken those mitigating actions. And then any new mitigating actions and the date for those as they kind of come through. So what you'll see is much more of a dynamic reporting of risk. So expect to see those mitigating actions moving up into the existing controls, new mitigating actions coming in if we're not seeing that downward trend in terms of our adherence score to our current score. And that is a big shift, I think, one that we need to think about in terms of our programmes of work and making sure that we've got that really dynamic nature. And I think what my colleague Louise said earlier around making sure that we are reviewing and updating our risks regardless of the score because of the importance, the significance of this programme every month. So if we're not seeing changes there, we'll be reporting that and making sure that we can see that progress towards. So don't forget, when we're looking at risk, what we're always trying to do is to bring that current score as close to the target score as we absolutely can. So we should be able to see direction of travel.
Come back, Peter.
Thank you. If I just come back, I'll take, for example, the risk of loss of corporate knowledge risk that we discussed earlier as needing a correction. I think that's a good example of where the impact, for example, is likely to be earlier in the process rather than later in the process, because generally speaking, good staff who feel that they're under pressure to leave or who can't see a clear path through start to look around, and we've seen it in past waves where some very good staff have gone voluntarily before the phase of redundancies in the reorganisation. So you've got a really early impact risk there, and the mitigation requires actually I think the mitigation is probably in the risk above, which is the managed exit, the timing of redundancies and so on. These are things which you have within levers you can pull to control them, but they don't appear until rather later in the process, and that's the sort of timing issue that I think you need to get after in the risk scoring to get the risk scoring right. Having said that, you can't get a worse score than 25, so maybe it's already pre-scored.
Councillor Rodriguez.
Thanks, Chair. Just generally looking at this, I'm glad that the focus is around workforce, because I think it's been mentioned the worry around the staffing, kind of the risks around staff previously. However, obviously noting a concern around risk 5, 6 and 9, all around unmotivated workforce, recruiting, retaining talent, excessive loss of staff, all those risks scores have increased. And that's obviously not the direction of travel we wish for it to be going in. And that's a big concern. And then also number 8 on the insufficient resource to deliver business as usual, risk score remains the same, which I suppose there's no positive or negative, but clearly we want that to be in in a downward trajectory. We want that to be much better. So I'm just a bit concerned that whilst we see some progress being made in other areas, there's clearly still increased risk on quite a few, and we know that without our staff we're really not relevant at all. So just concern being raised on those 4 points.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to sort of step in at this point because I think for me this is almost the acknowledgement of the high risk nature of this programme of work, and setting that out as we did in particularly the February executive report. The nature of the risks that were set out there were considerable, and regrettably, you're absolutely correct, they haven't reduced. I think because the scale at which we're working, the pace at which we are working across the organisation. I absolutely concur, and taking Councillor Sieb's point as well, that we would have some timing associated with this. So at which point would we expect these to start to be reduced? In risk management terms, we call that a quantified risk assessment, to be able to work out at which point we could reduce them. But at this point in time, we're not in a position to consider reducing these because of the state of flux, if you like, the situation is with the number of staff. We do have one of the key issues that we do have is making sure that we link our performance report to some of these risks, and that's one of the pieces of work that Councillor Lachon's referred to, and Sarah and her team are leading on. So one would hope very soon you'll be able to see the impact of these risks, and are they manifesting in terms of performance. As you've seen in the performance report, they're not yet. They're not manifesting in terms of service delivery. However, we are seeing signs of the stress and the implications on staff, which you did see in the performance report. But regrettably, those scores will remain in place for some time. And by some time, I'm expecting them to be until at least the end of February, at which point we have to provide clarity to staff. But you're absolutely correct. And the officer cohort are also concerned about the nature of these risks, hence why we wanted to report them in the way that we have. Thank you, Chair.
Will, please.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was nice and quick. Yeah, a couple of things on this. On 8 and 9, what we've just been talking about. I'm assuming that 8 relates to the business as usual as it stands today, because the whole point of this exercise is to transform us into a different type of organisation that works differently, which doesn't sound like what you would call business as usual at the moment. So I suppose this risk has to be geared towards actually making sure we can get to the point where we can make the change without falling over. So I'd just like Alan's clarification on that. But actually the thing that really bothers me the most, and this is something I've always banged on a bit, I suppose, is treble 09, the loss of its staff with talent and organisational knowledge. And I look at the mitigations and I see that we've got this knowledge transfer toolkit, which is fine. The second one is just supporting staff who are leaving the organisation. I can't quite see, I mean, obviously it's extremely important, but I can't see how it necessarily mitigates against this particular risk. What would be more useful, I suggest, is the uptake of the knowledge transfer toolkit, because I'm guessing it's not compulsory. They don't sort of say to people before you leave, you have to fill this in. So it would be quite useful to know just how many people are going. Bearing in mind, of course, that quite a lot of the people who are going or wanting to go are likely to be, shall we say, at the older age range, carrying the most experience and knowledge of the organisation. And once they're gone from the door, that tends to be that. When I retired, I always thought, I felt that probably my relevance to the organisation would diminish after about 6 months. In this particular case, because of the huge changes that are being talked about, I think some of this knowledge may be more relevant for a longer period of time. So I don't know, and this is completely flying a kite, whether there are any ideas about keeping in touch with sort of senior staff or senior operational staff who've left afterwards, to try and tap into them if we need to. This is generally very much a goodwill thing, but it occurs to me that we need to try and be making steps in that direction if we can. That all makes sense?
Thank you, Chair. And I'm definitely going to be bringing Dawn in on this one as well, who's been kind of leading on the development of this work. I think first and foremost, whilst there may be informal arrangements with staff that leave the organisation that want to kind of potentially support or help colleagues, it wouldn't be something I would ever advocate or we would ever advocate as a sustainable way of managing that. I'm sure it has happened, and I'm sure it does happen in organisations that go through this level of change, but it's certainly not something we'd encourage. And I think for you as members, it would be a risk if we were to rely on that as a way of mitigating the impact. But I do take the point, Will, in terms of the benefit of having some of that experience and potentially on tap, but it wouldn't be something we would recommend relying upon as part of this process. The knowledge transfer toolkit piece of work, I've completed one myself today, in fact. It's been an incredibly helpful tool just to understand how we mitigate those impacts, how we are considering particular ways of working, because it's not just about how we do formal bits of work. It can be as simple as, where's the key for that office? Where's the key for that particular filing cabinet? How do you make sure that works? And how do you make sure that, how do things work around here? So there is that type of ability to collect that information in the knowledge transfer toolkit. So that's the process that we're going through, but it is inherently a risk again because of that level of organisational knowledge, or should I say previous organisational knowledge as well, that potentially could leave as part of this programme. That the challenge for us as part of our transformation programme, moreover, is I think to ensure that those new processes, those new procedures are put in place as quickly as possible, so that we don't rely on those older ways of operating, that effectively we have the new Somerset Council way of doing things embedded as quickly as possible once the restructuring takes effect. But I'll just bring Dawn in at that point, if I may, Chair, because Dawn's been leading the charge in terms of the knowledge transfer toolkit and actually setting the tone by putting things like blogs together for staff to show how it's been used. So Dawn's probably better suited to say how it's being deployed.
Anything else, Will?
No, I just wanted to find out what the general uptake was, how it was going down. I'm sure it's a very fine piece of work, but if it's voluntary, then of course you have to encourage and hope that people will use it. So I'm just interested to know, certainly from the point of view of this particular risk, how successful it was being at trapping organisational knowledge.
Thank you, Will. I thought you were going to ask the question about support for scrutiny.
Well, I'll come back to that in a minute, if I may, when I've remembered it. But I think Dawn wants to respond to my point on the.
Thank you, Councillor Wren, and through you, Chair. So I think Alan's really given quite an overview already of the toolkit, and yes, it is a voluntary toolkit that we've given to all managers and staff to use. However, we have heavily promoted it, and we are on an ongoing basis, we're encouraging all of our line managers not to have just standard exit interviews with colleagues that are leaving the council, but to really use these toolkits as a way of capturing that huge amount of organisational memory that people take with them when they leave us. And we, as Alan has said, one of my team who left recently on a voluntary redundancy as one of the schemes that we ran earlier this year, the toolkit was really piloted throughout the VR scheme, and it's been really, really helpful. And I'm sure when we go into the next phase and we've got colleagues leaving us, unfortunately, through compulsory redundancy, we'll continue to work with colleagues and helping them, supporting them, but encouraging them to share that knowledge with us. For the vast majority of people, they're really keen to want to share that knowledge and organisational memory, and it's a really simple way of them doing that and being able to share that back with the colleagues that remain in their teams. So I can't actually tell you how many have been done because we're not sort of policing this as such centrally. It's a toolkit that's out there for the organisation to use. It's widely available to all staff and all managers. And we'd have to really go back into each of the individual directorates and services and do that evaluation of the impact of this tool. So at the moment, it's in full flight. It's being regularly used. But we haven't done a full evaluation of it yet, but we've got some really good soft feedback that has said in those areas where it's being used and applied locally, it's really helping teams with that handover period, enabling people to leave well from the organisation, but also supporting those staff who remain behind.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may just come back on that. I'm assuming that, I mean, if the information is being placed into a SharePoint site, I mean, I'm guessing it's going to be fairly. How much sorting out of the information is going to be required, or will it sort of self-select as part of the toolkit? Will it sort of put the information in the right places, or is it going to have to be manipulated in some way?
No, there is a series of templates that the employee will fill in who's leaving. So it's very employee led, and there are prompts basically asking them various things. Now, each director or each head of service, each service director will have put together their own arrangements locally on SharePoint for the sharing of that knowledge. So because it's particularly relevant to that service and that team. So yes, we can do that evaluation and find out, obviously, through our heads of service and service directors, the extent to which these tools are being used and how helpful they are in retaining that knowledge. It's something that we worked with across the system. Really, we worked with NHS colleagues in bringing this toolkit in. It's worked incredibly successfully in the NHS across Somerset, and they've kindly kind of shared some of their tools with us to help support us through this programme. So it isn't something we've come up with purely on our own, and we're very glad of the assistance of other partners across Somerset who are helping support us to support our staff as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, may I follow on the point you've just reminded me that I should have asked earlier about the support for scrutiny?
Absolutely, Will.
Yeah, just for the benefit of the meeting, the chairs of scrutiny have been meeting. We are particularly concerned about the impact of the transformation process on democratic services staff. Clearly, this is not a place to go into a detailed debate about that. But one of the things we feel is that there is a real risk that in trying to run a big council with 110 councillors still, and even 96 after the next election, together with an effective scrutiny programme that runs 5 committees, we are very concerned that the amount of staff resource available in democratic services may potentially result in a dilution of the scrutiny service. Particularly, we have put this into the feedback, and I've had acknowledgement from the leader of the council, so I'm hoping we can make some progress on that. I think that was, Chairman, I think those were the key points I wanted to bring out. I don't know if there's anything else either you or any of the other scrutiny chairs, vice chairs, wish to add.
Before you come back, all the scrutiny chairs and most of the vice chairs were at the meeting, and all of us have the same worry because Jamie Jackson supports us at the moment. I'm very lucky to have Scott sat beside me, who's corrected me more times than I care to think about today. Alan, please come back.
Thank you, Chair. I wouldn't want to dive into the detail, as you would expect for the consultation response, because there's a lot of work to be done, and obviously there are individuals in the room that would be affected either way associated with that. All I would say is I'd like to thank the chairs and vice chairs for submitting their response and submitting it with such good clarity, being incredibly clear on their resource concerns, being incredibly clear on the development concerns and the limitations that the proposals may have on the ability of scrutiny to function moving forward. Yeah, I'd just like to thank you for that clarity. And we will be working through that as we would any consultation response, and ensure that it is taken into account as part of the work that we're doing. And of course, a response will be issued as part of the final consultation once the final consultation closes. But thank you for the very clear and concise response. It's been incredibly helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Keep turning it off and then fail to turn it on. The recommendations are that we process the current assessment programme risks, which include those with a score of 16 or higher that may arise during the change process, along with the status of actions, and to mitigate these risks as detailed in Appendix A. Have I got a proposer and a seconder? Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Peter. Can I have a vote, please? And can we make sure that this committee is kept right up to date, please, because it's important. Right, because we are so far ahead, Scott has said we're going to have another comfort break. So in 5 minutes' time, and I'm going to say 3 o'clock, we will commence again. Committee's now all present, so we will kick off again. Give you 5 minutes and you all take 10. I'm not sure you're going to be allowed another break now. Right, we are moving on to agenda item 10, Council Tax Reduction Scheme. Liz, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I may, I would like to introduce this paper and then hand on to Maria Christophe, our 151 officer. We are fortunate to have with us in the room Sean Warren, Will Walsh and Simon Doyle from the Revs and Bens services, with Sean as the team leader, the head of Revs and Bens. Colleagues will know that this is something that is very important to us. It's complex. This is part of a long story with what we call CTRS, Council Tax Reduction Scheme. We set the first CTRS for Somerset Council in December 22. So in advance of vesting, it has to be set in advance of budget setting because of the requirements of the billing authority. So we asked that the CTR scheme to be reviewed over 24-25 in advance of this meeting and the budget setting process for 25-26 in order to identify any potential savings that would be from the 1st of April 2025. So that was, of course, in part due to the financial emergency, and you've all heard me talking about that far too much. So if I may just remind this committee chair that Council Tax Reduction Scheme was fully funded by government until 2013, and then as part of austerity, the council's funding has been cut and the council has continued to meet the gap between government funding and the cost of the scheme. So the cost of the scheme to Somerset Council, because although we are the billing authority, we are not the entire precept that people have on their council tax bill. So the cost to Somerset Council in this year is 28.3 million. 15.2 million of that relates to working age residents. The council tax reduction scheme for those of state pension age is prescribed by government. We cannot control that, but we cover the cost of it. So we have the history, of course, of what the 4 district councils did, and they all had different schemes. 2 were banded schemes, 2 were means tested schemes. One had the maximum discount of 100%, that was South Somerset. Others had different discount amounts. So we have asked that this be consulted on, because we have to consult publicly for any changes to our council tax reduction scheme. Last year at full council, colleagues may remember that we took a vote on council tax reduction scheme, but that was simply to increase the banding in line with the DWP percentage increase, which that year I think was 6.7%. So when we looked at the consultation at executive this summer, I think it was July, it seems a very long time ago now, the executive removed 2 of the 6 parts on which we were to consult. So we removed, first of all, the first £25 of earnings, because we felt it was important that people are encouraged to work and that that is benefit to them when they are working. And we took out the certain benefits, including those for disability, because we felt that that was unfair. So we consulted on reducing the discount bands. I'm presuming that your committee members have read these papers, Chair. I do realise there's a lot of detail in them, but if I went through every detail, we would be here long beyond the next meeting due in here at 6 o'clock. We consulted on the introduction of non-dependent deductions. So this is non-dependent people, adults living in the same household, which had an estimated saving of 1.5 million a year. We consulted on restricting support to a Band D council tax level. So that had smaller savings of 86,000 a year, but that just meant if somebody was claiming council tax reduction and they lived in a Band E, F, G house, they still had the discount, but that it was at the Band D rate. We also consulted on backdating of claims, so reducing that to 1 calendar month. And we also are looking at increasing the income bands by 1.7%, which is the inflation figure from September, which you'll notice considerably less than last year. So one of the other things, Chair, that's really important that we consider are the disregards, so the very significant list of disregards that are taken out of the calculation, if you like, if that's fair to term it that way, before the banding level is agreed. And also the additional help that we can offer to residents as well as council tax reduction. So we realise that we are in these proposals reducing support in some places. It is, of course, for us to work out and establish exactly where we can increase support in other ways. So there are things that we already do in the way of agreeing payment plans. And as portfolio holder, I see evidence on a regular basis of how we work with people who are in arrears, sometimes in distress, to agree affordable payment plans. And we also, our officers, work with residents to ensure that they are not missing out on Department of Work and Pension benefits that they are entitled to, and also such things as single person discounts. We also have an exceptional hardship scheme that's been in place since, as I said, December 22, and we have had the benefit of the Household Support Fund. This is something where we have been able to allocate monies in certain ways to people who need support with their household budgets. That has recently been confirmed by the new government that it will be in place for the whole of 25-26. That is extremely welcome to hear that that is confirmed for the full financial year. And we believe that that will give us an opportunity with more time as we move through our budget setting to establish how best we can use the Household Support Fund. We also undertake we did it as part of consultation to write in the good old-fashioned way with a going through the franking machine, I'm sure not stamping, but we wrote to every single household in receipt of council tax reduction. And that is, the number is mentioned in this paper. It is something in excess of 30,000 households. And when you look at the number of taxable households, because some households are not taxable, for instance, homes that are entirely for students are not council taxable, but it's over 11.5% of taxable households do receive some discount at some level. So we are asking Scrutiny Committee to comment upon the proposed changes to the council tax reduction scheme, also the exceptional hardship scheme, because we are moving where we call on support from CTRS into exceptional hardship for such things as foster carers and other people. So you will see all the details of that in your paper. So we are asking for comments and whether this committee has any additional comments or recommendations to make before the paper goes to executive on the 2nd of December and will then go to full council on the 18th of December. So I hope, Chair, that's a reasonable introduction and obviously with a lot of technical ability on either side of me, happy to take questions. Thank you.
Is Maria coming in next?
I don't have anything to add to that excellent introduction, Chair.
Right. I'm ready to take questions or comments. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Non-dependent deductions. There are two aspects of this which concern me. One is the paper contains absolute statements as to what the category of person is. But I think it would be very helpful if there were some indication on timing, because it includes a group of people, such as boyfriends, for example, that may have moved into a property, and the tenant may not be clear as to where or rather when that needs to be declared. And I think it would be helpful if we provided some clear guidance so that there was clarity, and tenants and residents knew when we expected them to have declared it, and equally within what sort of timescale if the person left the household. Because it's always been an issue where people may not wish to actually acknowledge the breakdown of a relationship, or and thus they miss out. I think some clarity around that would be useful. And similarly, I'm not quite clear from the paper how foster care, for example, is removed from that, because the definition of non-dependent young person would include a child in foster care, the way it's written. I know there are specific provisions for foster carers elsewhere in the paper, but I think there's a bit of ambiguity as to whether you intend the foster child to be the young adult, shall we say, to be in or out.
If I may come in first there, Chair, just to say, I think on the timing, that's about the single person discount and when it applies and when it doesn't. I'd just like to say, of all the casework I've received since becoming this portfolio holder and since vesting day, I've only had one inquiry about the single person discount and removing it because somebody was staying for 3 months. That is the only time I've had to, and the answer was, yes, you do need to declare that, and declare it from the date that person is in the household, and then again the date on that person leaves the household. I think the foster carer question is really interesting because it's really important to us as an administration when we brought in the 50% discount for foster care, Somerset foster carers. So this is not for the independent fostering agencies, it's for Somerset's foster carers. So I'll just ask Sean if he or either of his colleagues can add anything more to this.
The policy that's due to be introduced that we've had prepared by a external agency, that will clarify what stands as non-dependent. And when we notify people of these changes, as Councillor Leishon referred to earlier, we will clarify what a non-dependent means for county tax purposes, as well as detailing when change of circumstances need to be declared. So that should address both points.
I just want to remind the committee, Tom is next, that we had this in front of us in August. We made some recommendations. They are shown in the papers, and you may want to refer to them again. Tom is actually next, and then Diego after him. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for the report. It's a complex topic, but I thought the report was really comprehensive and really clear. So thank you to the team for putting that together, and Liz for your brilliant explanation as well. My starting position of this, to be truly transparent, is one of real nervousness and worry about the changes that are proposed in this paper. So I have got a few questions and points to make, which would be great to hear responses to, if that's okay. The first is to start with the consultation itself. So on page 220 of the report, I might just be misunderstanding the data points. I just want to make sure I've understood it. On the graph on page 220 at the bottom of the page, it says that 51% of recipients of council tax reduction were in support of reducing the level of the bands, but yet the graph on page 221 at the top says it was only 13%. So I'd like to understand just that data point and what that really means. I might have just slightly been misreading the graphs, but it'd be good to understand that. I don't know if you wanted to come back on that first before I launch into some other questions on slightly different topics.
Is anybody speaking? We can't hear.
No, that's
Nobody's
because we're trying
speaking
to
at the moment.
formulate a reasonable answer. Apologies for that. I think Nicola is probably closest to the answer for us at the
Who's
moment.
going to give the answer now? You formulated it. Nicola, are you doing it?
Well, my reading of these graphs are that the table on the bottom of page 220 was the overall response to the consultation and for council tax recipients. But actually at the top of 221, the 13% amounts to the percentage level of discounted responses. So those are actually, those of those people who are actually receiving a discount would be my interpretation of it.
But sorry, I don't want to get too much into kind of the committee wants to go on to other things as well. But at the top of the graph on the bottom of page 220, that's split into two lines: CTR recipients and support proposal. I can't understand what the labels mean on the graphs. I just want to make sure if we're going to take a decision that's potentially going against the consultation response, we need to be really clear on what the consultation and what people said to us.
Chair, could I just say, I would expect that if people were in receipt of a benefit or a discount or an exemption, that the majority of them would want that to continue. I would expect that to be the case. And this is something where we are trying to balance our position in a financial emergency. When we get to the final report this afternoon and our budget proposals, we'll see the position that we are still in, even after all the work that's been done on transformation and the pay bill reduction. And that is the reason why we're here considering this paper. It is not because we wish to change council tax reduction scheme. I'm sure everybody in the room and elsewhere would understand that it would be preferable and easier if we continued with the same council tax reduction scheme that we've had for the last 2 years. So what I'm most interested in, and the questions I have asked officers the most, is, I know it's an overused word, mitigations, but what mitigations can we put in to help those people who would see the level of discount reduced? So those who are having 100% discount, and that includes people who get particular benefits, that takes people straight into the top band and the 100% discount. So those who one might call the most vulnerable will not be affected. But then there are people, households, because of course council tax is a property tax, it's not an individual tax, as we know. So those households would see their discount reduced. And how can we best help those people in other ways through other funds that are at our disposal, such as the Exceptional Hardship Scheme and the Household Support Fund, to better mitigate that circumstance for those households? Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense, but it doesn't quite answer Tom's question. Would it be possible to give him a written answer outside of this committee when you've had time to discuss it?
Absolutely, Chair. We have time before the 2nd of December when this paper is heard by Executive, and then time again before the 18th of December when it is heard and voted on by all members at full council. So we do have some time, and I'm of course extremely willing to do whatever I can, both on explanation of the graphs and going back to the officer who put the graphs together, and also a fuller explanation of where we believe mitigations will be possible, because I completely agree with Councillor Deakin that this is what really matters.
Thank you, Liz. Back.
Sorry, I had just another very quick couple of questions, if that's okay, Chair. So I fully agree about mitigations, and I do think more detail is needed for me around what mitigations we can put in place and a bit more structure around that, because at the moment it feels a little bit like there might be, there might not be, we're not quite sure, we could happen, it might not. I think more certainty is needed. Just in terms of The impacts themselves, so on page 243, there's a really helpful table, which I'm sure wasn't easy to put together, with the average impacts per various types of household. Appreciating that they are averages, can I just check, is that a mean average of all of those households and where that falls? Is that modal? I just want to get a sense of, because if it's a mean, that could be really skewed by extremes at each end of that as well. So it'd be good to understand the flow of that. And I would really like to get some real life stories in this, because £10 written in a report doesn't feel like a lot, but £10 to a couple with no children or £11 to a couple with one child a week being lost in income is a really big impact to them and that family. So I just want us to really understand what that is going to mean for people on the ground. I appreciate we're in a really difficult financial situation and this might be the choice that we have to take, but it is a choice and I want to make sure we're making that choice with as clear a view as we possibly can.
The average that's shown in the chart there is a mean average from the caseload that we looked at.
Can I bring Lee back in, if you don't mind, Diego, to answer Tom?
Oh, no, I wasn't. It was a question, Chair. Sorry.
Diego, you're now, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just perhaps before I go to the question I want to ask, reassuring to see that the recommendation that this committee made, which was not to get rid of the 100% discount, was kind of heard and reflected in this report. So that's positive. I do still have one main concern from this. And if I look at the EIA on page 209, after page 209, just scrolling up, sorry, around the disability one in particular. So, sorry, still scrolling up. Yeah, so it says on the impact assessment there that 5,606 disabled households will lose on average £9.03 a week, or £470 a year. That to me is of real concern, because these are households which mostly haven't got the ability to generate any extra income. And then when you go to your detailed impact analysis of the changes on page 243, that is reflected exactly in the comments in there, where it does say disabled households will lose higher amounts than the average and are less likely to be able to increase their income. I think, and also it then goes on to say that there's been a significant increase in applications for exceptional hardship. I'm just really, really concerned about the impact on those 5,606 disabled households. And I appreciate one of the answers may be that there's that exceptional hardship scheme, but actually it's a lot more challenging for many disabled households to apply. And when you have a 1 month kind of backdating for some disabled households that may rely on a friend or a family to apply for them, for example, it's maybe just a minute number of cases, and they will lose out as a result. So I'm really, really concerned about the impact on disabled households. And I wonder if there's anything that we can do to recommend to relook at that, or what's in place to kind of protect disabled households, because I don't see that in the report.
Liz.
If I could just come in, Chair, to say this is exactly why we took that part out of the consultation at Executive back in July, because one of the parts that we might have consulted on was in about disabled benefits, and we did think that that was extremely important. I take your point about the exceptional hardship. There are individual cases in the citizens' advice response, which was, we've included it for completeness. It was actually received after the closing date, but we ignored that fact. It also included the 2 parts that the executive had already taken out. So from that point of view, I just ask committee members to be aware of that the executive had taken those parts out, but that they were still responded to in the citizens' advice response. So there are whole parts of the citizens' advice response that in effect need to be struck out because executive had taken those out. So I hope that's clear.
So just for clarity then, is it the case that what I've read in the equality impact assessment where it says 5,606 disabled households will see a reduction, is it the case that then those 5,606 disabled households will not see a reduction in the CTR? Just for clarity, if I'm getting a bit confused.
And my understanding is it will depend which banding they come into. So the one thing I have learnt is that it's really difficult to just say an average household in any way. And my learning from our officers is that all of this is virtually a case-by-case basis because people's circumstances are different, and it is impossible to say an average household with one person with disabilities or an average household with two people with disabilities. You simply cannot, you can't make it that simple. Chair, I think Sean has some further information on graphs that might be useful to your committee at this time.
Thank you, Liz. Go on, Sean.
My apologies for not being able to answer earlier, but in answer to your question, the first chart that relates to the people who responded, the percentage that felt it would impact them personally. So within the first graph, 51% of people who were in receipt of CTR felt that the proposals would impact them personally. 42% saying that they didn't feel it would impact them. The second chart, excuse me, refers to whether they agreed with the proposals being put forward. So that's where the difference is there. One's to do with the impact on them personally, and the second one is whether they agree with the proposals. So apologies for not being able to answer that earlier.
Are you happy?
I'm still not entirely clear, and I'm sorry, I may just being really, really stupid, because the impact assessment clearly states that 5,606 claimants of disabled households will see a reduction in CTR. That's what it says in the EIA. And from what you're saying, you kind of, what the cancellation is saying is that that's probably not accurate or something along those lines. So I just want to be really, really clear. Is that EIA correct in the comments it makes that 5,606 disabled households will see a reduction in CTR?
So the number that's detailed there takes into account all of the proposed changes. So it's not specific to non-dependent deductions. It's not specific to the council tax discount bands reductions. It's all the proposals that are in the report that would, if they're all brought in and adopted, then 68% of those with a disability, so the 5,606 there, will be affected.
Thank you. Right, moving on to Lee, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm first of all, my comments, a couple of points. So I support Councillor Deacon's comments in relation to clarification, but I also think that with this one, following on with Councillor Rodriguez's point, I was actually going to highlight the age-related impact, which is which trumps Councillor Rodriguez's number, because mine is 12,000. The number for age impacted is 12,633 potentially impacted by the changes, but only by £7.99 per week. Again, that's the point I was going to make is that the equality impact assessment seems to be highlighting a number of very high risks, but are specifically, as the officer indicated, relating to worst case scenarios. So one would suggest that perhaps there may be a need, depending what this comes out of this meeting, what goes to executive, about maybe, and I apologise to the team in the Equalities Impact Assessment team that I may be making more work for them, having some form of clarification attached to that. So if proposal A is accepted, then this, if proposal B is accepted, then that. And the other point I would like to make, I'm a little bit concerned by some of the mitigations proposed. If you look at page 215, the 3 forms of mitigation that are proposed is to make sure people know about it for at least 4 weeks beforehand. And the other bits of mitigation are we'll keep an eye on it and monitor it on a monthly basis, but there's no reference to what might be done should any negative impacts be identified. So I would suggest perhaps maybe the mitigation that's being proposed for these particular items in this impact assessment may need to be revisited again. If I've misunderstood anything, I'm happy to withdraw comments.
Can we go on, Liz?
Chair, it's the writing to all those who see a reduction in their CTR at least 4 weeks before they receive their council tax bill. So that is obviously before people start paying for the new financial year. But we can look at that again and see if it's possible, but we have to allow for the fact that this has to go to full council in late December, tight on probably the Christmas break. The exceptional hardship scheme, I've written that down as something because we have feedback from citizens' advice as well. I do know from dealing with applicants to the exceptional hardship scheme that again, because council tax is a household tax, it requires all of the adults in the household to put in both income and expenditure. And I have, for instance, had a piece of casework where one of the adults in the household was very keen to do that and very keen to obviously be able to claim some reduction, but the other adult in the household was not prepared to put forward that information. That then makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for us to help in that particular case. So I would just add again that there are many complexities that make it really difficult to see anything as an average case.
Thank you.
Just to follow up, Chair, forgive me. So in relation to some clarification in the exceptional hardship scheme, do we have an indication of what sort of timescale it would take from application to confirmation, if necessary, please?
So we monitor exceptional hardship payments on a monthly basis. We try to deal with those within 10 working days from receipt. But again, it's a case-by-case basis because of the level of detail that we need from the customer to evidence what their income and expenditure is. If the customer provides everything at the first port of call, which our online forms do request, then it would be within 10 working days. Upon receipt of an exceptional hardship payment application as well, what we can do, and indeed do, is contact the council tax department and put any hold on any action being taken on that council tax bill pending the outcome of that exceptional hardship payment.
Thank you, Peter.
I think any council tax reduction scheme is difficult, and any changes to a council tax reduction scheme are themselves always a difficult decision. And when you're trying to actually reduce the cost of a scheme, as we are, because we don't have enough funds coming into the authority to actually allow us to set a properly balanced budget, then the decision to reduce the help you're giving to some of the neediest people in our area becomes a doubly difficult decision. So I wondered if we could have clarity as to what happens to a council tax reduction scheme should we hit a 114 notice and end up with commissioners.
Are you going to come in here, Maria?
I think it is for me, isn't it? I was actually going to draw members' attention to the exceptional hardship table of paragraph 41 to see how much has been drawn on in the current financial year at month 7. 148,000 so far. But in terms of, so this is a scheme that has discretion and can be changed, which is why it's here today. Should the council find itself in a section 114 position, then all non-statutory services would be looked at, and anything where we have discretion would need to be looked at as well.
Yes, Peter.
So just for clarity, the scheme would be at risk if we ended up with commissioners, and the work that we're doing to try and find a way through our current financial difficulties enables this scheme to continue, part of which is reducing the cost of this scheme.
We have to, sorry, through you, Chair, we have to strike a balance between affordability and managing support to our vulnerable residents, which is why there are all these mitigating actions in terms of support. If you look at paragraphs 14 that are within the report to help support our residents. Exceptional hardship is one thing that's available to all residents, not just those in receipt of council tax reduction scheme. I don't know if that's come through as strongly as it needs to. We're also looking at the ability to use the continuation of the household support fund to support our residents. But fundamentally, the most important thing is if a resident is entitled to benefits, then we are helping them access the benefits that they're entitled to, which actually enables their affordability in terms of financial resilience to move forward. There is discretion around this scheme. The proposals here still enable the bandings to stay, so that the bandings that are not being changed are the 100%. That could be changed should we be in a section 114 position. And within this report, it's very clear how much the council is paying to support this scheme. We've made it as transparent as possible so we have that visibility of how much the scheme is costing the council.
Finish, Peter. Barry. You, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. The conclusions that you've got at the end of this report, each claimant losing out would be asked to pay an additional £7.99 a week, only £79.90 a week. That's the difference between, well, eating and eating is the difference between all sorts of things. A lot of these people budget down to the last 50 pence a week. If they get to that stage, can they then come to you and would take advantage of Peter's Exceptional Hardship Fund, or would they be ruled out of that?
No, they wouldn't be ruled out by any means. When it comes to an exceptional hardship application, we look at an individual's income and expenditure, and we do ask for evidence of income and expenditure, and we make a decision based on that. We look at someone's circumstances holistically. It is never just a case of yes or no. We will either award or not award an exceptional hardship, and we do have conversations with customers as well. It's not just an online application and a faceless process. We do contact customers in each case where we feel either more information is needed or they haven't represented their true circumstances.
Dave Mansell online, please. Next.
Thank you, Chair. I'll leave my camera.
Hold on a minute, Dave. Maria, did you have your hand up to answer? You did.
Yes,
sorry.
I did. That's okay. Through you, Chair, I just wanted to highlight that for me, it's really important to understand that I'm going to reiterate the exceptional hardship is available to everybody, and we would urge any resident that is having challenging circumstances in paying their council tax, whether they're eligible for council tax reduction scheme or not, that they contact the council tax department so that we can ensure that all of the things that we talk about in providing support to our residents, we are actively doing, whether it's accessing benefits, whether it's discounts or CTRS that they're entitled to, whether it's exceptional hardship or anything else that we can do in terms of payment plan that will enable it to be more affordable. Not all of our residents pay their council tax over 12 months. Some of them still pay over 10 months. They are entitled, if they wish, to change that to 12 months to make the payments more affordable. So there are a number of things that we can do, and we would urge residents to always contact the council tax department. They are here to help.
Sorry, Dave, it's all yours now.
Her hand's gone down.
Thanks very much. That's fine. I'll keep my camera off to hopefully ensure my signal's maintained. Interesting debate and discussion. My thoughts on the council tax reduction scheme were previously that it was about right. I felt reassured by the scheme we had in place from what I'd been told about it, and we've been told about it. My feeling is that it's important to ensure that we do keep it right. I'm less inclined to try and mitigate for any failings by relying on something else, especially something else that may be later removed. So my view is that we should try and ensure that we are keeping it right. I'd like to focus on two of the recommended changes, one which has been raised, one which hasn't. The one that has been is about the discount bands, and it's good that we're maintaining that it's recommended to maintain the 100%, but clearly the ones below that, which did start then at 75%, that's now gone down to 50%, and the lower one bands below that are down as well, and that does feel like it could be a concern. There's been comments already on the charts, and I would just add to that yes, for me too, and having looked at it now even more carefully, the one on page 220 is confusing, and I think in future reports that providing greater clarity on that one should assist us. The one on page 221 does look clear to me, and what that appears to be saying is that 3/4 of those, so a big majority of those who currently benefit from the council tax reduction scheme or have low incomes of at a level below 20,000, 3/4 of them have said don't change it. So they have given a very clear message, and a big majority saying keep it the same, don't change it. That looks clear. So I am noting that. Okay, so that's one of the recommended changes where I still feel a level of concern over what change we're making here. The other one is number 4 in the executive. Yeah.
Can we answer the first one first, please, if you don't mind?
Okay, yeah. I mean, well, should I get to the question I was going to come to on both of them? And that is, and then I will come back to the other one if you'd like to do it separately. And the question I was going to come to was, what reassurance can be given to us about the impact? Because I haven't quite sort of picked it up from the report. We've got the £7.99, and that tells us something, but it still, I'm not sure, gives us a full story. How reassured can we be that people are not going to get into financial difficulties from these changes? So firstly, with the banding changes.
So, Chair, if I may come in to make it clear that the consultation was to reduce the top band to 75%. And we, as an executive, have required that the 100% reduction be left in. So we have not taken that as shown in the consultation, but of course, the responses that you see in the graphs are from the consultation that was to reduce the top band from 100% reduction to 75% reduction. And I've forgotten what the second question was. Sorry.
You wanted assurances.
Well, Chair, none of us in this room can assure anyone how this and other factors like increasing energy costs again and possibly increasing food costs again are going to affect people's household budget. All we can do is to put every mitigation in place that's possible and to make access to the exceptional hardship scheme. And I look to my left here to find out how possible that is, to make that as accessible as possible to make sure that it is known, and that it is known to people who are not currently claiming CTRS, because they may have, for instance, illness or bereavement in the family. And that I have seen that, and I have seen the impact that that has had on household budgets, people of all ages. So I think that's what we can do, is to make those mitigations as accessible as possible, and therefore as effective as possible. As a council, we cannot change or impact or affect changes that will affect other people's household income, because we've seen over the last years, we've seen what happened during lockdown, we've seen what happened with inflation, we've seen what happened with interest rates. So some of these things are in our control, and a great many of them are out of our control.
Thank you, Liz. David, your second point.
Okay. Firstly, if I just may provide some clarification on the first one. Okay, yes, the 100% discount is kept the same. The recommendation is not to change that now, but the discount people receive is related to their income. So that's only those on the very lowest incomes. The other bands are still changing. So currently, the next band down, as you go down by income, is 75%, then 40%, then 25%. The proposal is to change those other bands to 50, 25 and 10%. So there are further reductions recommended in the changes here. And I think we're focusing on the 100% and missing that the others have changed, it sounds like. So I have to say I'm still feeling concerned here about what impact may occur from those. And as I said earlier, still remain my preference is that we make sure this scheme is right and not try and mitigate it by other schemes that may change in the future and then suddenly come back and knock it. That, you know, that's just too complicated. It's also making people go through several layers of applying for help, and that doesn't feel right either. But, you know, we should simplify these things and not make them way more complicated, because that will just stop people from claiming too. So that's on the first one of concern. The second one is number 4 on the executive summary. So reducing the period of backdating a claim to 1 calendar month. My recollection from what that is currently is that it can be 12 months, but it's discretionary. So it's not an absolute. Officers are actually taking the circumstances into account, and at the moment, if they feel the circumstances warrant it, they can backdate by to up to 12 months. And the thing is, people are often not aware of these forms of help and so on. They're pretty hidden away, and you know, it may not be until they become pretty desperate that they finally get access to it. And expecting them to get access to it within 1 month, I think, is expecting too much. For myself, I prefer the previous scheme that had that discretion to allow up to 12 months if the circumstances warrant it. So again, I'm sort of same sort of question I was going to ask for that one. You know, what is the impact of that? What reassurance can be given that we're not going to be causing a hardship or taking people into financial difficulties? Thank you.
Yes, Liz.
Chair, on the backdating, I would say that with the previous scheme, with that backdating up to 12 months, this council was an outlier, and that actually other councils didn't do anything like that amount. The other thing that I just wanted to bring to committee's attention is the percentage of claimants who receive 100% reduction. That figure is 37%. I just need to look to my left to check, is that of working age claimants? So 37% of the working age claimants do have 100% reduction, and that would not change for them.
Thank you, Liz. Right, last point from Tom, please.
Thanks, Chair. So I'll be very brief. Maria made a great point around payment schedules, 10 or 12 months. I wonder if we're possible to get some data on what that current flow looks like. So both at an overall level for just council tax payers, maybe by band, and then those receiving council tax reduction, again, by the percentage that they receive, the proportion who pay over 10 months, the proportion who pay over 12 months. Because I appreciate there might be an opportunity to shift some people from 10 to 12, but if those getting reduction are already, there's 75% of them are already paying over 12 months, then there's not as much to gain from that as there might be. So it'd be great to put some data around that, because if that is something that we can do to help mitigate, then that sounds like a great option.
Yes, yes.
If I may, to try and complete this, there is a letter that goes out with the council tax bill, which is a really good opportunity to put to households what else is available to them. And I would suggest that we need to be asking officers to ensure that we use every inch of that paper that goes with the council tax bill to ensure that people know what is available to them, including the 12 monthly payments. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I'm going to add to the recommendations. And I'm going to add the following: that this committee to receive an update regarding the impacts on people with protected characteristics from the final council tax reduction scheme 25-26, the details of the take-up of the exceptional hardships scheme and the planned mitigations by the summer of 2025 ahead of consideration of the proposed council tax reduction scheme for the year after 26-27. So we have 3 recommendations. I intend to take them on block if people don't have a problem with it. Can I have a proposer and a seconder? Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Peter. Can I have people voting in favour of those recommendations? And against? And abstaining? You're not voting at all, Councillor Carr. Are you going to vote? Did he? Oh, right. I know it's carried. Much that is carried. I'm going to move on. We are now looking at Liz again, non-domestic rate, discretionary rate relief and hardship policy review. From what I can see of this, most of this is driven by the government. And so what I'd like you to do, if you can bear it, is to actually highlight the bits that aren't driven by the government so that we're not going to overrun our time enormously.
I believe it is all driven by the government, but I will ask Sean just to check on that, please.
Thank you for that. No, you haven't got relief behind you, should you?
So the report going forward, the details regarding the retail, leisure, retail, hospitality and leisure sector, that is driven by government. The removal of the local newspaper relief is driven by government. The part of the report that refers to private schools and restricting their ability to apply for discretionary relief as a result of removal of mandatory rate relief. That is part of the Somerset Council proposals. We're proposing that as a result of the changes the government are making to mandatory relief being removed, and it is just changing the scheme to stay in the spirit of what the government is putting forward.
Thank you for that. Has any member of the committee got any questions they wish to ask about this? Then can I have a proposer for the set and a seconder for the recommend? Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Diego. Could I please have a vote on what is in front of us? That's carried. Thank you. Right, moving on. We are at the last agenda item. A long afternoon, guys. Well done. Agenda item 12, budget options 25, 26 and onwards. Liz. Oh, sorry to, yeah, I'm going to be nasty to you and say the Three Stooges are leaving.
Yeah, let me tell you from my perspective, I value these officers hugely and highly. Their work is so important to Somerset and to this council. And I have heard from other members with a lot more experience than I have that actually you only know about this work when it goes wrong. You never hear about the good work. And I'm pleased to say that I'm often copied in on resolution of really difficult situations, and I am always so appreciative, not just of the fact that the work has been done, but that it's been done with such care and consideration for people's individual circumstances. So let us move on to the most difficult bit of the papers this afternoon, Chair. So I will pass over to Maria Christofi. This is her paper. This is her work. It has my name on it. This is, if I may say so, Chair, the work of a lifetime. I thought I'd done some difficult tasks and some difficult jobs before, but actually to find a way to create a sustainable and therefore stable council for Somerset is incredibly difficult. I would just ask, as Maria takes us through the paper, I would ask her to make sure that every one of the 5 recommendations is really clearly explained to your committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liz. Maria, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, through you, Chair. So that the report that you have before you today, I'm going to go through slowly the report. I will talk about which tables I'm referring to and which paragraphs I'm referring to, and hopefully a slightly longer introduction to the report so that we've got a better understanding before I open it up to questions. So this is the budget proposals report. This is the first set of budget proposals that are seeking to close the budget gap. Work to close the budget gap before the February budget setting and reports. This follows on from the October report where the medium-term financial plan and strategy were updated from the previous budget report in February, and indeed the medium-term financial strategy update in April. So the October report took the gap from 103.896 million to 88.796 million within the medium-term financial strategy for 2025-26. So the new revised gap, based on a number of different assumptions that are listed within the report, within paragraphs 15, bring us to a revised gap of just under £89 million. Now, of course, there's a lot of work to keep that gap at that level, and we touched on the in-year position affecting rolled forward pressures as part of an earlier agenda item. It's really important that members are reminded that in order to close the 2024-25 gap, and to balance the budget in February, there were a number of one-off resources that were used in excess of 80 million, of which 2 of them were the earmark reserves of just under 37 million and exceptional financial support, again, just under 37 million pounds. Now, those are 2 one-offs. There was also one-off from the collection fund surplus that was also used. So there are a number of one-offs that were used to balance the current year's budget. We are working towards trying to balance the budget in a sustainable way, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about. There are a number of objectives, 6 key objectives in paragraph 8 that are part of the medium-term financial strategy in terms of how we're operating, and there's quite a bit of background information between paragraph 10 and paragraph 12 that I think is particularly important for members to note. So we've only got a 1-year settlement that's been announced by the current government, and indeed in prior years we only had 1-year settlements for a number of years from the previous government. There doesn't appear to be any certainty regarding financial funding from government beyond what's been announced in the Chancellor's autumn statement made in October. We are awaiting the provisional settlement numbers that will tell us what our share of that funding is that was announced in the Chancellor's speech. She also went on to tell us that the apportionment and the basis of which the funding would be allocated will be changed. So we're waiting to see exactly what that is. There's no confirmation regarding council tax or adult social care preset. This is paragraph 11 for future years at this stage, although we have made an assumption around both a 2.99% council tax increase and a 2% adult social care preset for 2025-26. But I will come to that. That's just an assumption at this stage. But we haven't had the parameters around council tax confirmed by the current government. There's no, that we've got a number of different pressures that are national pressures, but also affecting us locally. We're here in Somerset. Adult social care, children's social care, and homelessness and temporary accommodation. I come back to children's social care, the placements in children's, and we make reference to this in the previous report that you've already seen on the agenda, the forecast overspend in children's social care placements. So we are actively seeing that pressure come to fruition here, and we need to have a response to that. The pressures in adult social care and homelessness at the moment seem to be being managed. We are working exceptionally hard as a council to manage these top three big pressures that every council that has these services is facing. Of course, there's a cost of living crisis that we're working through, inflationary changes, and while inflation has come down or did come down in September, it's crept back up in October. However, I just want to remind members that those double-digit inflationary increases are still baked into our contractual costs that we've got and the costs of running the council that are sitting there from the previous years in which those inflationary increases came in. So we haven't been compensated for that, and they indeed haven't been taken away. Interest rates have been sustainably high for a period of time, higher than they were in prior years. However, we have seen a slight decrease in interest rates more recently. Of course, interest rates have an impact on our cost of borrowing and the revenue cost of that borrowing in terms of capital financing. And this follows on from 13 years of austerity that I don't want us to forget, because that is the context of how we're working in local government, and in particular here at Somerset. Those 13 years of reductions in funding have been exceptionally challenging, albeit in the last couple of years we may have seen slight increases in cash terms. They won't have been increases in real terms because inflation was so high. There are additional pressures arising from the Chancellor's statement regarding employers' national insurance contributions, and of course the national living wage increases. So we wait to see the impacts of those and whether there will be funding that will compensate local authorities for those pressures that we're going to see. We've touched on the quarter two, forecast outturn position, which while we're seeing a balanced outturn position, it's not really balanced. We're seeing a reduction on the drawdown to reserves, and we need to see a further reduction to that to really see an impact. If we were underspending by more than 80 million, then I would say to you we're truly underspending. Anything less than that is not a true underspend, just a reduction on the call of one-off funding, whether it's reserves, earmark reserves, or indeed exceptional financial support. In paragraph 13, I make reference to the just under £18.5 million of ongoing pressures that have been identified in the quarter two forecast outturn. These absolutely need ongoing savings or ongoing mitigations to prevent that pressure rolling forward into the new financial year. There is only a provision for 5.9 million currently within the gap that you see in the medium-term financial plan. And ideally, we don't want to have to use any of that to manage ongoing pressures rolling forward. We want those ongoing pressures not to roll forward and to be managed within the current financial year in terms of the full year effect. Of course, we've got a number of uncertainties that we haven't heard about. I referenced those in paragraph 14. I reference inflation again. I reference cost of living crisis and demographic and demand pressures. We will be forecasting our demand and demographic scenarios as we move towards setting the budget in February. But of course, these will be scenarios about what may happen in the future. So they will be uncertainties in those numbers, but we will do our best to get them as close as possible. We don't know about future local government funding, and we do not know yet what's going to happen with the dedicated schools grant, the DSG, deficit, statutory override, which we referenced in a previous report on this agenda. All of these will need to be understood as we move towards budget setting in February. I'm not going to spend time on the assumptions in the medium-term financial plan and strategy, but I wanted to bring members to the budget gap in paragraph 17, because I think the table 1 illustrates this really nicely. You can see the new budget gap as agreed by executive in October is the just under 89 million in 2025-26, and right the way through to 2029-30, you can see all of the gaps in an incremental basis. I've also included a line which you may have not seen before in terms of the cumulative gap and what that means. In the previous report, we just included the total. So the overall for the 5 years is just over 154 million gap, and we need to do our best to close that as much as possible so that we come to a balanced position for every year that we're going to set the budget. That's the legal requirement, a balanced budget for the year that we're setting the budget. So for us, in this case, it's 2025-26. You can see the assumptions around council tax increases. Of course, none of that will be determined until we go to council in February, where the recommendations around council tax will be made in that meeting. But for modelling purposes, we've modelled a 4.99% council tax increase in 2025-26. That's 2.99 main council tax and 2% adult social care precept, and then 2.99% for the next 3 years in terms of council tax increases, and nothing in the future year. There are a number of revenue proposals that have already been agreed within the medium-term financial plan and strategy. We spoke on a previous agenda item about the in excess of 38 million that we're trying to deliver in 2024-25 of savings that must be delivered. But there are also savings in latter years of just over £10 million that have already been agreed. This medium-term financial plan takes into account that all of those savings, both current year and future years, will all be delivered to time, profile and value within the assumptions. So we are expecting those savings. In paragraph 19, table 2, this should be familiar to members. It's appeared in a number of different reports, but these are the savings themes that we're working on as an organisation to identify savings to bridge the budget gap for 2025-26. And I'm pleased to say that we're presenting within this report £43.950 million worth of savings. They are detailed in Appendix A, but within the next 3 tables, tables 3, 4 and 5, we are, if you like, demonstrating and illustrating the savings categorisation in different ways to give members a little bit more information in terms of what they mean. So you can see them by Executive Directorate in Table 3. You can also see them by savings themes in Table 4 and by savings type in Table 5. We also, in paragraph 22, make reference to a £9 million saving that's been included as part of a previous year saving that is being proposed to be substituted as part of this report, because the reorganisation that was linked to has been superseded by the workforce programme savings that are £34 million as proposed in this report. So we are proposing to substitute that. Table 6 under paragraph 23 on page 392 illustrates this. You can see the savings of just under 44 million coming off the just under 89 million pound gap, and the substitution being added back on. The forecast gap, assuming that all of these are agreed by executive, means that we are at £53.846 million gap still for 25-26, and over the medium term horizon we are at 119.313 million that we will need to close over the medium term. The statutory responsibility is to close 25-26, and there are a number of initiatives that are being worked on at the moment. Not all proposals were robust enough to appear in a public report for decision, and only the robust proposals are included within this report. I come back to pressures in paragraphs 25 and 26. I won't labour the point, but they need to be addressed. And then I bring us to reserves in paragraph 27 and table 8. So our forecast outturn in terms of our reserve balances are that the general fund reserve will remain at 52.374 million, but the earmarked reserves are forecast to reduce by 38.667 million to 66.209 million. And that's from a balance as at the 31st of March 2024 of just under £105 million. These balances are subject to external audit, but that's where we are forecasting. Again, the dedicated schools grant is being referenced here because it has, in paragraph 28, it has a potential impact on our financial resilience and our ability, depending on whether government are going to extend the statutory override, that will enable us to not count the forecast 64.199 million deficit as part of our financial resilience. If the statutory override is not extended, then we will be looking at a section 114 notice. So we want government to extend that. There are a number of financial risks and other issues that have been included within paragraph 38. Government funding, savings agreed and delivered to time, profile and value, significant pressures regarding rising demand that we're not able to see our demand management initiatives actively manage the demand so it doesn't come to fruition in terms of our modelling, adult social care, children's social care, homelessness, and we're looking at escalation of care need, complexity of need increasing in those areas. Any legislative changes that government may have that either create new responsibilities or new burdens to local government without these being fully funded would present an issue and a risk for us. Any tax changes, national insurance employers, national insurance contribution changes are some of these, and the increase around the national living wage. I will just take us to paragraph 46. There are a number of proposed savings that have an impact on our full-time equivalent proposed reduction in roles within the proposals that are here. The net reduction overall is 609.5 FTE net reduction in roles. These are illustrated in Appendix A by the appropriate savings proposal for transparency, but for by directorate within the table that is in table 10 in paragraph 46. I'm going to stop there and take questions on the report, and then I was going to suggest us move into Appendix A and take each proposal on its own as we go through to see if members have any questions, Chair.
Thank you for a very full report. Who's got questions? You've not got any, Maria. Don't look round and look surprised.
Okay, in which case you move to
it's
Appendix
the end
A.
of a long meeting. Right, I'm not going to change any recommendations, and I'm going to take the ones we have in front of us on block.
Chair.
Appendix A, you want to go to Appendix A? Sorry.
Yes, please, before you take any recommendations. So I've got Appendix A in front of us here. There are a number of proposals here. I'm just wondering if members have got any questions on the proposals as listed What I will do is I'll read out the name of the proposal and then pause to see if any members have any questions. So the first one is a commissioning proposal to support people to live independent lives. Value is £3.7 million of the savings. Do any members have any questions having read the proposal that's in the report, or rather the appendix?
He does.
Thank you, Chair. Maria, just a point of clarification, really, just so that I'm clear what I'm looking at here. So, what the Appendix A is the appropriate directorate's recommendation that's come forward to you for what they can do to save money going forward during the period that's laid out. And one would assume that along with the paragraph that you're using there is a breakdown of how they will do that, and it's clear available should anyone want it.
So let me answer that question. So if I take members back to paragraph 19, table 2, these are the saving themes that we're working through. This one comes under the commission in the efficiency theme, and has been tested as a savings proposal that is robust. Now, I should have said from the outset, we're aiming to deliver all of these savings before we set the budget in February, but by the latest, the 31st of March 2025. So we will not be needing to track the savings for delivery in the new financial year. There is a detailed proposal that sits behind this, and we have officers and members in the room that can answer questions on this. But the My Life, My Future programme, not only have we seen it deliver the savings in the current financial year within the savings tracker in the previous report, it's set to deliver an additional 3.7 million that is being worked through at the moment.
Thank you for the clarification.
Any questions on the next one, Dan? Point 2. No. Property maintenance. No. Base budget review. No. Rationalisation of council offices. I wish to add one to that. I've now attended 3 scrutiny committees in this room, and this is the first one this month where the actual microphones have worked, because people are playing with the system when we have not got it set up, because they've come in when we're not here. I would like to propose that we move the scrutiny committees to A block, where we have complete control over the microphones and the audio systems. Any comments? No. There's a lot of nodding going on in the committee members. So we'll leave it like that, Maria, at the moment, and you can do what you want with it.
So I suggest we take your suggestion about where the scrutiny meetings are held offline, and we work together with Democratic Services to see what the answer to your question is. In terms of the review of operational council offices and reduction in the operational estate, there are a number of buildings that are here listed that will reduce our costs, because we're either selling them or increasing our income, as we use Dean House, for example, at the moment, because there's a rental income, if you like, that we receive from that property.
Thank you. Right, moving on. Council tax reduction schemes being looked at and dealt with. The workforce program's been looked at and dealt with. That is the end of appendix. Oh, sorry, I've got a hand up. Yes, Councillor Rodriguez.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the workforce programme, how likely is it that you'll achieve those savings? Because obviously, looking at the risk report earlier on in the transformation programme, there is still quite I'd say, considerable high risk there of not delivering the proposed savings. And you've mentioned earlier that you expect most savings to be in place by February. Is it the case then that you expect the whole redesign of the workforce to be done and dusted by February in time for budget setting? And how confident are you that they'll achieve the full savings that you're projecting in your budget?
So having worked on this programme, I can tell you that every role, every budgetary amount, financing of different roles, if they're this is all a general fund saving, but everything has been looked at. So I know exactly how many roles, where the roles are and the values, and we have ensured that the workforce budgets that go forward are funded, and that we're very, very clear in terms of the expectation of funding streams if they're different to general fund. So this saving here is completely robust. Now we're in staffing consultation at the moment, so what I don't know is if there will be proposals that come forward from staff that are being consulted with that will mean that we need to change the proposals because they've come up with something better. But I would expect the financial envelope around this to be preserved as much as possible. We're expecting the financial envelope to need to be preserved.
Can I come back on that a minute? In a previous paper, we have over 1,000 vacancies. We're asking here for 619.5. Gives us headroom of 300 vacancies, odd.
So it's probably helpful, and I know there are others on the call that can help with this. There are a number of vacancies across the organisation. There is a large proportion of that within this FTE reduction that are linked to vacancies. However, there are also staff that will be ring-fenced to, and it will depend on the outcome of the consultation and whether there are different proposals that we end up taking forward. But if we made an assumption that everything was taken forward that was as it is presented here, then there will be a reduction in roles that will affect individuals.
Before you come back in, Dawn, do you want to say something? That way you've appeared in big figures in our video.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. I like to sweep in at the end. Now, I think Maria's sort of covered that very well. Clearly, when you just look at the numbers themselves, it would look like we wouldn't make any redundancies at all with 1,000 vacancies. And we've been working really hard to maintain a high level of vacancies to mitigate the need for compulsory redundancies next year, you know, prior to the end of March. However, some of those vacancies don't have any budget attached to them. And as part of the work that Maria and I have been looking at is we've been going through every single vacancy that's currently held on our SAP HR system and almost having to kind of ignore what's on the system, which says 1,000. There are more like 700 real vacancies with budget attached to them, and we know exactly where they are. So we're doing this cleansing process behind the scenes, and that's why there's a bit of a disconnect between the information on the report and what's happening currently on the workforce programme. But we have that level of detail. We will mitigate against the need for compulsory redundancies as much as possible, but there will still be some, which is inevitable of a complex programme of this scale, really. And some of those vacancies are in hard to fill or hard to retain roles with very specialist qualifications and skills where other people are just simply not going to be able to apply or match to them, even with a certain amount of professional and personal development. And they will be roles that we're still potentially going to have to look externally for if we cannot fill them internally. So it's a really kind of complex moving process, as I'm sure you can imagine, but it's good news that we've got that many vacancies. And we're also going to be looking at all of our roles that are held by agency staff to ensure that anybody who is at risk of redundancy can also match against any of those roles in case they might be suitable alternative employment. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, just finally, Chair, my last one on this one. So on the full-time equivalent projected reduction in staff, do we know yet, or do we have any foresight as to what that means for service delivery, recognising that you've given us some figures for the executive directorates, or is it more of a case of let's wait and see what happens when the job's done? Just wondering.
So my understanding is, and there are people on the call that can answer this probably better than I can, but all services have been looked at. There are a number of opportunities where we've brought a number of teams together from across 5 different councils, and there is the opportunity to streamline those teams. We're using a number of different kind of digital system and processes to make things better and easier to work. And what I can't answer is I don't know what's going to come out of the staff consultation to know what will be the final proposals that will be taken forward. But until then, what's being proposed here has been looked at, and we will be, if there are service impacts, the expectation is that we are showing this as an ability to drive like a transformation forward. So the expectation is that we're not seeing reductions in service delivery. And if there are any of those that come forward, the expectation will be that they are mitigated. But I don't know what's going to come through from the staff consultation, so I can't really answer that question at this point. But my expectation is that we wait to see what comes out of the service staff consultation.
Alan did volunteer to answer the question, Maria, and he's now going to come in.
So I think, if I may, just to kind of segue really from Maria's response, the impacts on services are being considered currently, some of which have been identified from the outset, but of course we've already gone through a mitigation process before they were set forward. But in addition, we are seeing a considerable number of responses that have been submitted so far. I think we're in the region of 300, maybe 400 responses, if not more. And a number of those responses, not only have they outlined specific issues about individual staff, but also provided alternative proposals as well, but also recognising the financial envelope that we're working within. So as a result, we believe that some of the impacts that may have been identified early are actually being mitigated through those responses. But Maria's absolutely correct. We won't have a full picture that we can advise members on in terms of an actual real impact that will happen until consultation is closed and the final decisions are taken. Clearly, we are working or will work to mitigate those impacts as far as possible, either through restructuring those proposals, looking at processes, because there are a number of latent legacy processes that still exist, which are inefficient. And then finally, we're looking at the introduction of technology where appropriate to mitigate process impact, in particular around things like business support. So a number of different impacts, and there will be group briefings on the interim view of impacts that will take place prior to any final view of impact, and that'll be reported. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to finish the discussion there. We have the next important meeting of this committee in January, where we go over the finalised full budget. I would like to ask all the Scrutiny Committee chairman and vice chairman who are here today to please come back to that meeting, having looked at and scrutinised the savings in their individual scrutiny areas, if that's all right with all of you with that. I'm going to take the recommendations for the executive on block. Can I have a proposal? Sorry, who's put? Oh, you put your hand up again, Maria.
I have, if you don't mind. So I just wanted to just touch on, we haven't actually bridged the budget gap for 2025-26. We need more savings in order to do that. Should we not identify sufficient savings, we will either be in a position where we will need exceptional financial support, as we did in the prior year, albeit maybe in terms of profile. I'm not clear what that one-off requirement will be until we work through the next few weeks and we come forward for the February meeting. I also wanted to bring members' attention to the timetable that we've got within the report. So the idea in table 9, paragraph 41. So the idea was that all scrutiny committees have the opportunity to scrutinise the proposals today or that are being presented, and the executive will be seeking to decide on them at the 2nd of December executive meeting. The next time that scrutiny chair, all scrutiny committees and chairs at the next corporate and resources scrutiny will be looking at the remainder of the report and any new proposals for the budget in February on the 29th of January 2025. And I've just noticed the dates say 2024, so you must forgive me, but we will amend those.
Thank you for that, Maria. Right, I come back. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Peter and Simon Cole again. Can I have a vote, please, on taking this paper forward? Those in favour? And those against? And those abstaining? 4 abstentions, and it's passed. Reminder, there's an all-member briefing understanding local government finance on Monday the 27th. Having been through these 5 hours, I expect most people know a little bit about it now. Finally, Scott, you're going to look at the forward plan very quickly.
Thank you, Chair. And again, just a reminder, unsurprisingly, that your next meeting will have a key focus again in terms of the in-year budget monitoring and also a further update on the improvement and transformation programme. What I would flag just at this stage, again, we are just looking in terms of dates and venues, so just be alive to that.
Thank you all very much for attending, and thank you those online for attending, and look forward to seeing you next time.